The taxicab was still warm when Lily Ramirez vanished in the Depot District of Lubbock, Texas. Population 212,000. The night of November 13th draped Lubbock County in a layer of dry, cold wind that whipped red dust into thin ribbons along the old industrial streets. At 1:56 a.m., driver Harris Cole glanced through the rear window as the 19-year-old freshman stepped out, clutching her small crossbody bag while crossing the narrow gap between two brick warehouses. Lily was heading back to her dorm after meeting friends, carrying the faded blue bag. She had used it for years and never left it behind. The older driver watched her figure fade into the darkness, her light-colored denim jacket, the last moving streak before she disappeared around the corner of the cold building. What happened in the next 7 minutes would haunt Lubbock for the 15 years that followed. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the night of November 13, 2006, the Depot District of Lubbock was bathed in the characteristic blurry neon glow, the kind of light that made every movement feel distant and elusive. The West Texas wind blew through the rows of old brick buildings, carrying a chill that made the whole neighborhood seem to shrink into the silence of a midweek night. 4 Texas Tech University students, Lily Ramirez, Hannah Cole, Zoe Harper, and Daniel Rucker, had just left a small bar after a gathering that stretched past midnight. The laughter, lights, and bustle of moments earlier seemed to evaporate as soon as they stepped outside, leaving only the wind and the sound of footsteps blending into the darkness. Around 1:40 a.m., Lily split from the group when a yellow cab pulled up in front of the bar. She told her friends she wanted to head back early to prepare for a test the next day. They waved goodbye in a slightly tipsy state, none of them thinking it would be the last time they saw her. The taxi pulled away, turned the corner onto 4th Street, and vanished from sight. The only analog camera on the route captured a blurry image of Lily at 1:56 a.m. She stepped out of the cab, pulled her jacket tighter, then turned toward the long concrete path where the dull yellow streetlights only illuminated a few meters ahead. The frame shook slightly from the wind, making Lily's movements seem stretched, slender, and solitary. Farther down the street, an old pickup truck passed by before quickly turning into a row of abandoned buildings. The engine noise faded away. Lily adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, took a few more steps, then continued deeper into the dark stretch between the 2 rows of rundown buildings. The camera lost sight of her after just 3 seconds, 3 brief seconds that would be the last remaining images of Lily Ramirez. The wind blew harder through the narrow alleys, swirling scattered papers and kicking up the characteristic red dust of West Texas. No one knows how far Lily walked or whether she saw anything after the moment the taxi drove off. That night passed in silence, as if the entire city had sunk deep into sleep and noticed nothing unusual. The next morning, Lily's dorm room was still tidy as when she left. The bed was undisturbed, the desk lamp was off, her phone wasn't charging, and there were no signs she had returned after the previous night's outing. Her roommate called friends, then called Lily's number multiple times, only getting silence and ringing with no answer. By early afternoon, the Ramirez family received a panicked call from the dorm. The unease quickly turned to fear as they tried to reach Lily without success. And by mid-afternoon, after hours of waiting with no news, they did what no family ever wants to do. They called the Lubbock police directly to report that their daughter was missing. When the phone rang at the Lubbock Police Department's dispatch desk that early afternoon, the officer who answered initially thought it was a routine missing contact report, the kind they got almost every week, especially from families with college students. The woman on the other end, her voice clearly shaking, identified herself as Lily Ramirez's mother and said her daughter hadn't returned to the dorm from the night before. Her phone had been off for hours and none of her friends knew where she was. The duty officer asked the standard questions from the 2006 protocol. Does she often stay out overnight? Has there been any recent conflict or stress? Is it possible she went somewhere on her own or stayed with a friend? Even though Mrs. Ramirez answered no to all of them, the officer's voice remained calm, following the guidelines of the time. An adult missing for less than 24 hours wasn't considered an emergency, especially in a college town like Lubbock, where thousands of students lived irregular schedules. However, when he heard the mother insist that Lily never left without texting, that the family talked to her every evening, and that her phone being off for so long was unprecedented, the officers started taking more serious notes. He asked them to provide descriptive information: height, hair color, last seen clothing, the route Lily might have taken after getting out of the taxi on 4th Street. Each detail was entered into the old dispatch software system, a simple but primary tool for prioritizing missing persons reports. When the family mentioned that Lily had a test that morning, something she would absolutely never miss, the officer's expression darkened. These factors, combined with Lily being missing through a cold night and no one hearing from her for hours, led him to decide to escalate the case to immediate follow-up, even though it didn't yet qualify as a special emergency under the rules at the time. A patrol unit was notified to return to 4th Street, where Lily was last captured on camera getting out of the taxi. Another officer began calling her roommate to verify information from the dorm side. The Ramirez family was asked to come to headquarters to sign the official report, while bringing any good quality photos of Lily for identification purposes if needed. In the small waiting room at the police station, amid the smell of strong coffee and the hum of printers, Lily's family sat close together, their eyes constantly fixed on the door. Every time an officer appeared, they tensed up waiting for something: a new update, a clue, or at least clear guidance. After verifying the statements from the dorm, cross-checking with the time Lily left her friends, and the timestamp of the camera showing her exiting the taxi, the afternoon shift investigator concluded there was enough basis to file an official missing persons report and begin the initial search process. He briefly explained that while the case couldn't yet be classified as an immediate life-threatening situation, the consistency in the family's and friends' statements showed this wasn't a temporary runaway. The file named Lily M. Ramirez, 19 years old, sophomore student, was entered into the system and marked for priority follow-up. Lily's description and photos were printed out for distribution to patrol units in the 4th Street area, Depot District, and routes Lily might have taken. The family was instructed to go home and await contact from the department, but as they stood up, the mother still asked, "Are you sure you'll look for her?" The officer paused for a beat, then could only respond in a professional tone that didn't hide the gravity, "We'll start today." As the family left headquarters, the duty investigator began the next step, gathering statements from the last people who saw Lily safe. Around 4 p.m., Hannah Cole and Zoe Harper were brought in for interviews, while Daniel Rucker was separated into another room to avoid them unconsciously aligning their memories. All three were still in shock upon learning Lily was officially missing, and the initial panic made their answers fragmented, requiring repeated questions to become coherent. Hannah spoke the most. She recounted that the group had arrived in the Depot District around 10 p.m., gone to a familiar bar, and sat at tables near the small stage area. At that time, Lily seemed normally happy, with no signs of sadness or worry, from 11 p.m. to nearly 1 a.m. The group had a few cocktails and chatted with other friends in the area. Hannah clearly remembered that around 1:30, Lily started feeling tired and wanted to head back early to prepare for her test the next morning, while the group wanted to stay a bit longer. Zoe confirmed this story and added that Lily had called for a taxi on her phone, since the area around the Depot District was pretty empty at that hour, and hard to hail one directly on the street. Both remembered seeing Lily walk out of the bar and approach the yellow taxi that had just pulled up. When asked for the exact time Lily left the group, Hannah said around 1:35, while Zoe said close to 1:40, a small discrepancy, likely due to subjective perception in the noisy bar setting. Daniel, questioned separately, said Lily left around 1:30 or 1:32, differing by a few minutes from the others. The investigator noted these times but didn't rush to judge, as minor memory discrepancies are very common. When asked if Lily mentioned going anywhere after getting out of the taxi, or planning to stop somewhere else? All three said no. According to them, Lily's only intention was to go straight back to the dorm. After recording the bar departure time fully, the investigator moved to the next key point, the moment Lily appeared on the street camera. The blurry footage clearly showed the timestamp of 1:56 a.m. when Lily stepped out of the taxi on 4th Street, about a 7-minute drive from the Depot District. This matched the statements that Lily got in the taxi around 1:40. The issue was the camera captured Lily walking toward the residential area, then lost her after just a few seconds. There was no information after 1:56 proving Lily continued on the expected route. The investigator asked the group if anyone knew whether Lily had a habit of taking shortcuts or stopping for late-night food. All denied it. Daniel even said Lily was usually afraid to walk alone at night, especially in poorly lit stretches. When asked if Lily mentioned meeting anyone after leaving the bar or having acquaintances nearby, all three said they didn't know. However, when the investigator asked them to describe the last time they saw Lily, inconsistencies began to emerge. Hannah said Lily was carrying a red fabric bag, while Zoe remembered it as a dark blue crossbody bag. Daniel said Lily only had a small wallet, no bag. As they debated this detail, they realized each remembered Lily differently, which is common in evening situations with drinks and dim lighting. The investigator didn't see this as suspicious but noted it, since details about the victim's belongings would be crucial for search teams. When determining the exact moment Lily vanished completely, the investigation team used two key points, 1:56 as the last camera image and 2:03 a.m. as the time Lily's phone stopped connecting to the cell network, a detail just provided by the network technical unit. This created a 7-minute window, a short gap but long enough for anything to happen. The investigator asked, "Did any of you call Lily after she left?" Hannah said no, Zoe said. "I only sent a text asking if she was home yet around after 2, while Daniel said he didn't message because he assumed she'd go straight to her room." The small differences in contact timing led the investigator to verify exactly from call and text records later. Every answer, every moment was placed on the timeline the investigator was sketching on the whiteboard. 10 p.m. Group enters bar, 1:35 to 1:40. Lily leaves group, 1:56. Camera captures Lily exiting taxi, 2:03. Phone loses signal. But even though the timeline looked coherent, small inconsistencies remained. Hannah remembered Lily wearing a dark jacket. Zoe said it was lighter. Daniel said Lily seemed normal, but Hannah insisted Lily looked a bit worried before leaving. These points weren't enough to suspect the friends, but enough to show their memories didn't fully align. The investigator ended the session feeling he had grasped a critical timeline while recognizing many gray areas needing clarification. He understood that to find out what happened to Lily in the brief 7 minutes between 1:56 and 2:03 a.m., every detail, even the seemingly smallest ones, could become the deciding piece of the puzzle. Right after completing the interviews with Lily's group of friends and establishing a basic timeline, the investigation team shifted their focus to the scene where Lily was last captured on camera. Around nearly 6 p.m., as the late sunlight in Lubbock began to fade, 2 officers and a seasoned investigator arrived at the section of 4th Street, the area considered the final marker for Lily before she vanished between approximately 1:56 a.m. and 2:03 a.m. They parked the patrol car right under the dimly yellow streetlight, where Lily's figure briefly appeared in the degraded VHS camera footage, and from that position, they began reconstructing the path she might have walked. 4th Street during the day is not an overly dangerous route, but the time Lily appeared there was when lighting was at its lowest and pedestrian traffic was minimal. The surveillance camera was mounted on the facade of an old auto repair shop, with a limited view that only covered about 15–20 meters of the sidewalk in front. As the investigator walked along the exact stretch Lily had taken, he realized that once out of the lens's range, a person would immediately disappear into the darkness, as if blending into the gaps between the long-abandoned buildings. From the taxi drop-off point, Lily could have turned left toward the dorms or right into a short stretch leading to a quieter residential area. However, turning right was less likely as it would have made her route longer. The investigator assumed Lily continued straight toward the main avenue, the logical path for a student wanting to return to the dorm before an exam. But as they proceeded, about 60-70 meters from the drop-off point, the first inconsistencies of the scene became clear: sparse and uneven street lighting, some sections completely dark due to shadows cast by unfinished construction projects onto the road. The patchy illumination made nighttime observation nearly impossible without assistive equipment. The youngest officer in the group tried standing at the estimated camera position to capture the frame, while the lead investigator walked along Lily's projected path. In just 8-10 steps, the pedestrian's figure was swallowed by the darkness between two buildings: a closed hair salon and an old abandoned small office complex. In reality, this was the first and largest blind spot that the camera could not capture, and also where Lily disappeared from the video footage that night. In the initial report, the investigator noted this with a heavier pen stroke than usual: area without camera coverage, high likelihood of incident occurring. In a city like Lubbock in 2006, with a very sparse security camera system, such blind spots were not uncommon, but its precise alignment with where Lily lost trace made this area the focal point. From the first blind spot, the investigation team continued surveying two additional side paths: a short alley connecting to the parking lot of a small law office, and a winding path leading to the old Lubbock residential area. Both places severely lacked lighting. The ground was covered in the familiar red Texas dust, with only old tire tracks and a few indistinct footprints, marks that had been nearly erased by the wind, indicating that verifying anyone's presence there on the night Lily disappeared was impossible at the time of the survey. The team also noted a wide-open lot behind the row of office buildings, where discarded construction materials lay scattered: rotting wooden planks, excess concrete, rusted paint cans, and partially rolled-up construction netting. This clutter created countless dark corners and hiding spots, enough to conceal the movement of one or more people without detection by cameras or passers-by. The investigator recorded the observation: terrain facilitates an incident occurring without leaving clear traces. The three officers split up to check nearby parking lots, large trash dumpsters, the back entrances of nearby bars, and even narrow passages only wide enough for one person. But all results were the same: no personal items, fabric scraps, signs of struggle, or anything that could be linked to Lily. The street at that moment was completely empty, as if her disappearance had occurred in an invisible space. Around 7 p.m., the wind picked up stronger, dust continuously whipping into faces, making the survey difficult. One officer noted that the whistling wind through wall crevices could easily mask any cry for help, if there was one from anyone that night. Another point that made the investigator pause for longer observation was a dead-end path leading to a material storage lot. The entrance was behind two vacant buildings, completely submerged in darkness. Logically, Lily had no reason to turn into this dead end. But since it was within the radius of movement from the camera to residential areas, the team still recorded and checked it. Result: absolutely no traces. As the sun fully set, the group returned to the starting point for a final overall assessment. They confirmed that if Lily had continued straight from the camera position, she would have needed only a few more minutes to reach better lit areas. But since the camera lost her in the first few seconds, all assumptions had to remain cautious. The most senior officer concluded, if anything happened, it happened very quickly. In the darkness right after the camera. The survey lasted over an hour, but only reinforced one chilling fact: though this was where Lily was last seen. The initial scene provided absolutely no physical evidence or direct signs indicating where she went, whom she encountered, or what happened to her in those final minutes of the night of November 13th. When the scene survey yielded no clear traces, the investigation team had no choice but to turn to the only remaining source of information: people who were in the area around 4th Street on the night Lily disappeared. Within 3 hours of completing the scene check, 2 groups of officers were assigned to knock on doors of every still-open business, every lit apartment, and every homeless person or night shift worker who might have passed through that stretch between 1:45 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. A total of 19 people were questioned, including staff from 2 bars, a late-night delivery driver, 3 residents living in the row of buildings near the camera position, 2 homeless individuals regularly staying behind a parking lot, and 3 other taxi drivers. Among them, most saw nothing unusual. Some said that at that time, the area was mostly quiet since it was early in the week. The Depot District was only noisy in the central bar area, while the 4th Street stretch toward residential zones had almost no foot traffic. The taxi driver, who had picked up Lily from the bar, was called in for more details. He described Lily as polite, sober enough to clearly state the address, with no signs of intoxication or stumbling. When asked if he saw anyone following Lily when she got out, he shook his head, saying he only waited until she was out of sight before driving off for his next fare, noticing nothing out of the ordinary. But the investigators' attention focused on the statement from a bar employee at the corner near the camera position. He said that while closing up around nearly 2 a.m., he thought he heard a faint argument from the alley across the street, but wasn't sure if it was human voices or just the wind blowing loose metal sheets from repair work. The sound was too brief and unclear to determine direction, and since the area often had metal clanging from the wind, he didn't think it was significant until hearing about a missing student. The investigator recorded this statement but marked it as uncertain, because relying on vague sounds in strong West Texas winds was unreliable for conclusions. Another witness, living in a second-floor apartment in the same row, said he saw nothing but thought there was a male figure passing through the area shortly before 2 a.m. When pressed, he admitted it was quite dark. He only glanced from his living room window and couldn't confirm if it was a person or just a vehicle's shadow. He added that the figure moved quickly, heading toward the unfinished construction area. Though this partially matched the scene survey team's findings that dark spots could conceal movement, the vagueness prevented it from being a solid lead. Among the remaining witnesses, only one delivery driver said he saw 2 people in the distance around that time, but he couldn't determine gender, age, or if they were related to Lily's disappearance. The weak lighting made everything just swaying shadows in the night. These nascent details, though weak, gave the team a sense that Lily might not have been entirely alone in her final minutes. However, since all statements lacked direct confirmation, investigators couldn't use them to establish a specific direction. The consolidated end-of-day report stated, "No direct witnesses saw Lily after stepping out of the taxi. No one has clear information on suspicious individuals. Statements are for reference but lack sufficient reliability to establish suspects." At 9 p.m., the group gathered around the area map, marking each witness' position, the times they reported hearing or seeing something, then cross-referencing into the 1:56 a.m. to 2:03 a.m. timeline. One thing became clear: though Lily only walked a few dozen meters from the drop-off to the camera's blind spot, the surrounding area had too many dark corners and narrow paths for someone else to approach her unseen. The lack of direct witnesses didn't lessen the severity. On the contrary, it emphasized that the disappearance happened quickly, cleanly, and in an extremely limited visibility zone. The lead investigator, after reviewing all statements, concluded heavily, "We have no reliable leads, no clear direction, no suspect description. The only certainty is Lily disappeared in an area almost impossible to observe." With the vague information, the team had no option but to expand the search beyond 4th Street into less trafficked areas where if something happened, traces might lie outside any witness's view. The day's final conclusion was a short line: "Need to expand search immediately." The decision to expand the search was made that same night, just past 10 p.m. From the vague statements and completely empty scene, investigators understood that if Lily met foul play, traces were almost certainly outside the initial observation range. The Lubbock County Sheriff coordinated with the City Police Department to immediately mobilize a small but fully equipped search team, 3 K-9 units trained in human tracking, 2 patrol vehicles to block roads leading to the outskirts, and a Bell 206 helicopter equipped with searchlights for aerial sweeping. The search area was marked as a circle with a 2-mile radius from the last camera sighting of Lily, an area large enough to cover both residential zones and the empty land strips east of 4th Street. Night searches in West Texas always faced cold winds, red dust, and impenetrable darkness, even with high-powered flashlights. That night, the wind was stronger, whipping dust into light layers that quickly blurred any footprints, if present. Yet in missing persons cases like this, time was the most fearsome enemy, so no one argued or delayed. They formed a line and entered the search zone with absolute focus. The 3 K9 SEs were released on leashes, following pre-designated paths. One officer carried the athletic jacket provided by her roommate as a scent article. Lily often wore it to class, and her scent lingered clearly. When the jacket was presented to each dog's muzzle, all 3 reacted quickly, sniffing continuously, then pulling toward the northeast, away from 4th Street and into undeveloped land. This detail caught the team's attention, because if Lily intended to return to the dorm, she should have gone west or southwest, toward campus. Northeast led to dimly lit land with dirt roads, abandoned lots, and patches of wild grass mixed with unfinished construction. Still, the search team followed the K9 signals, since all 3 dogs were consistent. Near a dirt road about 5 meters wide, the dogs suddenly accelerated and pulled hard in unison, behavior indicating they were picking up Lily's scent or something related. Wind blowing from the east spread the scent that way, so the K9s reacted stronger near low-lying lots. 2 officers used spotlights on the ground. Thick dust mixed with old tire tracks, but nothing clear. Continuing another 80 meters, one of the 3 K9s stopped abruptly, sniffing repeatedly at a clump of wild grass pushed aside as if something had been tossed there. The wind's roar drowned most night sounds, but the handler's commands were clear. Hold position, light the area. An officer bent down, parted the grass and dust, then the flashlight hit a small dark object. When picked up, dust fell away to reveal a familiar shape. A women's black shoe, small size, the type young people wear for school or casual walks. Though covered in dust, the insole logo was still recognizable, and it matched the brand her roommate described in the initial report. The investigator immediately gloved up, quick-checked it, then sealed it in an evidence bag. No one spoke for seconds, as if unwilling to believe the first evidence in the disappearance was over a kilometer from the original scene, in the opposite direction from where Lily intended to go. The left shoe, the only item found, showed no clear struggle marks. The sole was slightly scuffed, but not enough to indicate it came off while fleeing or in a scuffle. Yet its location, far from the camera and in remote land no one enters at night, could not be dismissed. The Bell 206 flew lower, sweeping searchlights along the dirt road, but even strong light found nothing beyond wind-whipped dust. As the search team paused to assess, the lead investigator commented, "If Lily's shoe is here, she didn't go willingly." The shoe's appearance, though inconclusive, shattered the hypothesis that Lily simply changed route or wandered. A young woman alone at midnight had little reason to veer into this dark, dead-end land. The shoe being so far from the logical path forced the team to shift thinking. The possibility Lily was approached or forced to move could no longer be ignored. Following the discovery, the scene log was updated, and the case was no longer recorded as a routine missing person. The sheriff and Lubbock police quickly agreed the new lead was strong enough to change the entire perspective. They were no longer searching for someone lost, but seriously considering that Lily Ramirez had become the victim of a criminal act minutes after leaving the taxi on 4th Street. The discovery of the left shoe markedly shifted the investigative approach, and the next morning, the eastern dirt road area was expanded for sweeping with forensic field support. Based on the shoe's position, the search team worked backward against the previous night's wind direction, since the shoe likely wasn't dropped exactly where the incident occurred, but blown a few meters. This led to a low-lying strip along an old metal fence, where wild grass grew chaotically, and the ground had many cracks forming small crevices. Right there, less than 10 meters from the shoe, an officer spotted a long thin object, bright red almost fully covered in dust. When retrieved with evidence tongs, it revealed itself a torn backpack strap at the metal connector. The color matched the roommate's description of Lily's daily backpack, simple red canvas, slightly worn. The torn strap could indicate strong impact or yanking, but the investigator couldn't conclude immediately, as the tear edges weren't fully clear under thick dust. Still, its presence in the under 1 acre area further reinforced that Lily was likely approached here or forced off the main road. The forensics team continued scanning with UV lights. Under a grass clump, flattened as if by heavy weight, they found a very thin fabric thread, just over an inch long, light gray. The thread was caught on metal fence barbs, suggesting it was snagged or torn when its owner was pulled through. However, the thread was too small and fine-structured for 2006 technology limits. The forensic technician reported that with current lab conditions, they could identify fiber type and fabric origin, but DNA extraction was nearly impossible due to insufficient biological material. This frustrated investigators, but they still carefully sealed it since any evidence could become crucial with future technology. While forensics worked, the K9 unit continued scenting nearby. One of the 3 dogs stopped near harder ground, pulling hard toward a construction material lot. When the team approached, they found slight depressions in the dust. Depressions shaped like shoe prints, but mostly blurred by wind. However, with morning-angled light, investigators saw one clearer print, large size, about men's 10 or 11, heel deeper than toe, as if weight was shifted forward. The soil around the print was cored and boxed for sampling. However, determining shoe type, brand, or matching to any suspect remained difficult, as the print lacked full pattern for comparison. The investigator noted, large male shoe print, not clear enough for direct comparison. Consider possibility, this is the print of someone approaching Lily. By the end of the morning evidence collection, 3 items were recorded: torn backpack strap, small gray fabric thread, and large male shoe print. All were numbered, photographed, GPS coordinated, and sealed on-site per Texas Department of Public Safety standards. Each went into specialized anti-contamination bags, sealed with security tape, noting date, time, and responsible officer. The preliminary forensic report determined evidence insufficient to identify a suspect, but enough to conclude the situation abnormal, with likely forced involvement. The torn strap indicated physical force, the thread suggested contact with metal. The male print indicated another person's presence, where Lily may have gone voluntarily or forcibly. This led to reclassifying the case from missing person unknown cause to missing under suspicious circumstances. Though no evidence was strong enough for charges, they painted a preliminary picture. Lily did not continue her logical route, but was taken toward remote land with little used paths. The lead investigator's final log noted clearly, combined evidence indicates criminal act likelihood. Case needs shift to criminal investigation rather than simple missing person search. Those morning items, small, fragmented, unclear origin, provided no direct answers but raised more critical questions: why Lily left the main road, who was with her in the brief time after 1:56 a.m., and whether these 3 minor traces were all that remained of an event too quick for human eyes or cameras to capture. They were transferred to the DPS lab in Lubbock that day, serving as the first pieces of a still blurry picture, now shaped like a crime. That afternoon, the first physical evidence having been collected, the investigation team shifted to processing the only data source capable of recording movements related to Lily beyond witness statements: the analog video footage from the security camera positioned at the front of the auto repair shop on 4th Street. This tape had already been reviewed that morning while establishing the timeline, but only to the extent of confirming the moment Lily stepped out of the taxi. Now, with the discovery of the torn backpack strap, the strange fabric fiber, and the male shoe prints, the team was compelled to examine the entire frame more thoroughly for any details that the naked eye might have initially missed. They inserted the tape into an old conversion device that only allowed playback at low resolution with very limited zoom capability. The CRT screen displayed the familiar horizontal noise bands, an unavoidable characteristic of cameras from that era. But as soon as they rewound to the segment where Lily stepped out of the taxi at 1:56 a.m., the lead investigator noticed that in the brief seconds before the taxi turned out of frame, far on the opposite side of the street, the glow of headlights from another vehicle appeared, very faint, but definitely not belonging to the taxi. Because this appearance was so fleeting that it was almost obscured by image noise and reflected light, the team decided to slow play the entire segment from 1:45 a.m. to 2:10 a.m. The time frame when Lily was in the area. This is when they discovered what the initial review had overlooked. Around 1:48, in the left corner of the frame, a white car, based on the overall shape, appearing to be a compact sedan, passed in front of the shop and disappeared from view in just 1 second. It could have been any car, but the investigator marked the timestamp. The tape continued in slow motion. At around 1:53, the white car reappeared from the opposite direction, this time moving more slowly, as if crawling along or observing something on the side of the road. The car was going so slowly that the light reflecting on the pavement showed it was barely inching forward, meter by meter. Then it veered slightly toward the direction leading to the residential area and vanished from the frame. When Lily stepped out of the taxi 3 minutes later, the car was no longer in view, but when they continued fast-forwarding the subsequent segment, the team was startled to realize that the white car returned for a third time, appearing around 2:02 a.m., just dozens of seconds before Lily's phone lost signal according to system data. This time, the car did not pass by, as in the previous 2 instances. It stopped far away, with its headlights dimmed as if parked or waiting for something. Due to the distance and the age of the camera, it was impossible to identify the driver, the number of occupants, or the license plate. But the mere fact that the same white sedan appeared 3 times in under 15 minutes, around the time Lily got out of the taxi, made the investigator tighten the strap on his notepad. Repeated rewinds confirmed that these were not 3 different vehicles. The body shape, roof height, windshield angle, and headlight positions all matched. Despite the blurry image, they could still recognize the familiar styling of an early 2000s Hyundai Elantra model, a car common in Texas, but not so ubiquitous that its coincidental appearances at the exact time a young student disappeared could be ignored. When zoomed to the maximum, though the image became severely pixelated, the investigators tried to make out the license plate, but could only see blurred white blobs. Analog cameras lacked the ability to capture plates clearly when vehicles were far away or moving even at low speeds. A forensic video technician attempted to adjust contrast and reduce noise, but every effort only produced more distorted images that could not be used as identification evidence. The investigator noted in the report, license plate undetermined, driver undetermined, image quality insufficient for legal identification. Nonetheless, they could not ignore the abnormal nature of the behavior. First appearance: normal driving. Second, slow crawling, as if searching for something. Third, stopping near the blind spot at the exact time Lily lost signal. This suspiciously aligned with the wind direction, the dirt path where Lily's shoe was found, and the hypothesis that she may have been approached immediately after leaving the camera's range. The repeated appearances of the white car did not prove a crime, but it exhibited characteristics typical of stalking behavior, a term investigators only used when truly warranted. In the official record, they wrote, "White sedan appears 3 times around the time victim disappears. Behavior possibly indicative of target stalking. Insufficient data to identify suspect, but requires cross-referencing with registered vehicles in the area." One additional detail made the entire team pause. The third appearance of the car occurred only when Lily entered the dark area without camera coverage. It did not appear earlier, nor later, but precisely during the window when Lily was most vulnerable. This increased the likelihood that it was not coincidence. When cross-referencing the car's appearance times with witness interview data from earlier, the team noted that the vague resident statements about a male figure and light arguing sounds all fell within the same time frames as the car passing or stopping. Though this connection was speculative, it made the investigators even more aware that they were dealing with a disappearance that was no longer simple. In the small meeting room, as the group reviewed the tape one last time, one officer exclaimed, "If this car isn't involved, it's the strangest coincidence I've ever seen." But all opinions had to remain internal assessments. On paper, they could only record insufficient evidence to identify a suspect or related vehicle. However, one final line in the report shifted the case in an entirely new direction. White vehicle requires tracking and cross-referencing with registered vehicles within a 2-mile radius. Repeated behavior is abnormal, possibly suggesting the presence of an individual stalking Lily. From a camera segment that seemed useless due to its blurriness, the investigation team had uncovered the first piece, suggesting Lily may have been approached or stalked right from the moment she left the Depot District. And as the videotape continued playing its noisy black and white frames, they understood that this white car, though still unidentified, had become the new focus of the investigation. After the white sedan that appeared 3 times in the analog video was identified as possibly an early 2000s Hyundai Elantra model, the investigation team immediately moved to the next step, narrowing down Elantra owners registered within the city of Lubbock, particularly in the area around 4th Street. Although identifying a vehicle from blurry video footage was highly risky, it was the only specific lead they had at that point. The following morning, an officer was assigned to work with the Department of Motor Vehicles database to extract a list of all Hyundai Elantras from model years 2001, 2005 in the city. The initial list contained over 140 vehicles. This number was too large to check each one directly, but the team further narrowed it by radius to 2 miles from where Lily was last seen, matching the search area from the previous night. This reduced the list to 32 vehicles, continuing to filter by criteria such as single-owner households, ages comparable to students or graduates, and reasonable travel distance to the scene. They were left with 11 names. Among these, one name stood out for meeting the geographic and timing factors: Joshua Keller, 24 years old, a criminology student at Texas Tech University, living in an apartment less than 1.2 miles from the camera location. Keller's address was on a route that could pass through the area where Lily disappeared if traveling from the Depot District late at night. However, the investigators knew that geographic factors alone were insufficient for legal probable cause. They needed a soft approach to verify information, and thus Joshua was placed in the needs interview, not a suspect category. When 2 plainclothes officers arrived at Keller's apartment around 4 p.m., he was polite, somewhat surprised but not resistant when informed they needed to discuss the ongoing missing person investigation. Keller, living alone in a small apartment near campus, opened the door and invited them into the living room. The room was tidy, with many books on sociology, criminal behavior, and psychology on the table. A typical setup for a criminology student, nothing unusual. When asked whether his vehicle had been used on the evening of November 13th, Joshua answered immediately, "I drove it to the library around 10 p.m., stayed there for nearly 2 hours, then went straight home. I was asleep before 1 a.m. He provided details of his schedule, including meeting a classmate on the 2nd floor of the library who could confirm his presence. The 2 officers took notes but did not reveal that they knew about the repeated appearances of a white Elantra in the video. Instead, they asked casually, "Did your car ever pass through 4th Street late that night?" Keller shook his head. "No, that's not a route I take." The investigators noted Keller's demeanor: calm, no avoidance, no signs of fear or confusion. He maintained eye contact and did not hesitate in his responses. When asked if he knew Lily, Keller replied firmly, "Never heard the name." This was a key point, because if there had been any connection, Keller might have shown hesitation or evasion. During the interview, Keller voluntarily allowed the officers to inspect his vehicle, a 2003 white Hyundai Elantra, parked right in the small lot next to the apartment. This further convinced the investigators that he was unlikely hiding anything. External inspection of the car revealed no abnormalities, no fresh scratches, no red dirt in unusual places, and the interior was clean to the point of being unremarkable. In the report, one officer noted, "No signs of unusual use or suspicious indicators observed on the vehicle." The interview lasted just over 20 minutes and ended on a cooperative note. Keller asked, "What's going on? I heard about the disappearance, but didn't think I was involved." The two officers simply replied that they were canvassing all vehicles in the area as part of procedure, a professional response, and also the truth. At that point, they had no grounds to tie Keller to any suspicious circumstances beyond owning a matching vehicle model from the video. Upon leaving the apartment, the investigators noted that Keller was pursuing an incomplete master's in criminology, which helped him understand legal processes and likely enabled his calm responses to difficult questions. But knowledge of criminology could not be considered evidence of wrongdoing. Hundreds of students in the Lubbock area studied the same field. No physical evidence, no direct witnesses, no signs of deception in statements, and most importantly, no legal reason to detain Joshua Keller. The officers could only thank him for his cooperation and leave. In the end-of-day summary report, Keller's name was kept at light monitoring level, not a suspect, not flagged as suspicious, simply one of many Elantra owners connected to the search area. The entire team thought the same at the time. Nothing about Joshua Keller truly stood out. No nervousness, no evasive answers, no suggestive leads. They left his apartment with the clear feeling that identifying the owner of the car in the camera footage would be far more complicated than initially expected. After the session with Joshua Keller, the investigation team returned to the station in a state of limbo, no evidence to hold Keller, but also no strong leads to completely rule out his possible involvement. And it was in this ambiguous transitional phase that the initial investigative errors began to quietly take shape, not due to anyone's negligence, but because the case unfolded in 2006, when technology was limited, procedures were not as standardized as in later decades, and the pressure to quickly locate a missing person led to many assessments being rushed more than necessary. The first error, and the most serious procedural one, was the team's failure to impound Keller's vehicle for testing. Although the video showed the white car appearing 3 times around the time of Lily's disappearance, and Keller owned exactly that model, the team lacked legal grounds at that moment to treat it as cause for impoundment. But even without long-term impoundment, they could have requested Keller's voluntary consent for surface inspection, tire examination, undercarriage check, or dust sampling. However, Keller's overly cooperative demeanor led the lead officer to assess risk as low. They interpreted his confidence as a sign of non-involvement. This resulted in the vehicle not being forensically examined in any way, no red dirt samples collected, no tire tread comparison with soil from where Lily's shoe was found, no interior check for fabric fibers or hair. All of these, even if not yielding definitive evidence, should have been performed under standard missing person protocols in suspected abduction scenarios. The second error was failing to compare the size 10 male shoe prints found on the vacant lot with Keller's shoes, or at least cross-reference the sole pattern with common types in the suspect pool. At the time the faint prints were documented, they concluded the pattern was too unclear for comparative evidence. But they overlooked that even if unusable for legal conclusions, shoe comparison held significant investigative value. A sole pattern match alone could have prompted closer monitoring of Keller, or at least a request for the shoes he wore that night. However, because they believed Keller was not high on the suspect list, the comparison process was never initiated. The third error concerned the area known as private land, the large plot east of the blind spot that later became a critical piece of the entire case. On the night of November 13th and throughout the next morning, the search team only surveyed areas along the dirt road edge, avoiding deeper entry due to concerns about trespassing without a warrant. However, in actual missing person cases with suspicion of foul play, Police have full authority to access such land if evidence related to a life-threatening situation is likely present. This plot, over 2 acres, contained numerous small trails, abandoned material piles, and especially a narrow path leading to an old, unused storage shed since 1999. But fearing backlash from the landowner, police only walked along the fence line in open areas without searching deeper, where later determinations identified the most important traces. The fourth error lay in not fully reviewing the secondary camera systems along 4th Street. Within a 2-mile radius of the scene, there were a total of 14 cameras belonging to shops, homes, and warehouses, but only 3 were extracted in the first 2 days. The rest were overlooked for various reasons. Stores closed with no staff, tapes requiring time to retrieve, or simply limited manpower. The team thought the primary camera provided sufficient information and did not highly value the potential for secondary cameras to capture the white car's direction or a pedestrian figure. But this decision to bypass secondary cameras cost them a golden opportunity. The following week after the disappearance, a store north of 4th Street automatically overwrote old tapes, erasing footage from the exact time frame where the white car might have appeared a 4th time, or more importantly, where Lily might have walked through a brighter section of road. Investigators only realized this when returning to request the tape, but it was too late. Ultimately, the combination of these errors, not impounding the vehicle, not comparing shoes, not thoroughly searching private land, not fully reviewing secondary cameras, left the case stuck in a severe information void. In investigative systems, 1 error can cause delay, but 4 compounded errors nearly pushed the case into deadlock after just the first week. Police had no clear suspect, no strong physical evidence, no witnesses, no additional camera data. All that remained was 1 shoe, a torn strap, a fabric fiber, and an unlicensed white car appearing in the dark. These were insufficient to sustain an active investigative direction, and without specific evidence to continue questioning or monitoring Joshua Keller, he was removed from strict monitoring, retained only as a faint name among the 11 Elantra owners. The investigators at the time could not know that these initial procedural gaps would cause the case to remain unsolved for over a decade, requiring advancements in forensic technology to reopen it and find answers. But in 2006, it was all recorded in the report with 1 brief cold line, "Case temporarily without progress." The accumulated errors in the first week of the investigation forced the authorities to change strategy. If the crime scene around 4th Street yielded no further evidence, they had to expand the search to more distant areas, particularly southeast Lubbock, where vast stretches of farmland and private ranches extended toward the outskirts of the town of Slayton. This was open, sparsely populated land, crisscrossed by dozens of dirt roads cutting through crop fields and livestock ranches, the kind of place where, if someone wanted to hide a person or an object, the chances of discovery would be extremely low. At noon on the 8th day since Lily's disappearance, the order to expand the search was signed, and the sheriff's team, coordinating with DPS, launched Search Operation South Sector. The objective, to sweep 11 private ranches within a radius of 5 to 12 miles from the original scene, especially those with discreet access from dirt roads or located near routes that could be traveled at night without drawing attention. Searching this area was far more difficult than in the city. First, most of the land was privately owned. Police had to obtain permission from each landowner to enter and inspect. Second, the terrain was complex. Many ranches had abandoned barns, old trash pits, unfinished livestock areas, and rows of dilapidated structures, ideal places to conceal traces without anyone noticing. At the first ranch, a cooperative owner quickly allowed the K-9 team and 6 officers to check the main areas. However, despite searching the barn, livestock pens, and scrap metal yard, they found no signs related to Lily. The subsequent ranches fared no better. Most properties were so vast that even using a Bell 206 helicopter to scan from above, only the overall structures could be observed. not small details like fabric scraps or footprints. At the fifth ranch, located about 2 miles from central Slayton, they encountered a more complicated situation. The elderly owner firmly refused to let police enter, citing, "This is private property. No one is allowed in without a warrant." The man appeared unusually tense when he heard that police were investigating a missing college student. But since he had no obligation to cooperate without a search warrant, the investigation team could only note the location, ranch characteristics, and especially the secondary entrance at the back. A narrow trail just wide enough for a small truck, leading to an old livestock area enclosed by a wooden fence. The investigator marked this area in red ink on the map. Inaccessible. Owner refused. Requires monitoring. The 7th and 8th ranches also refused entry. At the 8th ranch, the refusal was even more adamant. The owner came out with a wary attitude, demanded the sheriff's team leave immediately, and threatened to call his lawyer if they did not comply. Without a warrant, police had no choice but to depart. This ranch had a particularly noteworthy location. It lay directly on the most logical route if someone from Lubbock wanted to head deep into remote areas without using the main Texas State Highway 84. The main entrance was a locked metal gate, but the southern side entrance had no clear barrier, just 2 old wooden posts and a narrow dirt road leading to a large tin-roofed storage building. One officer, standing dozens of yards away on public road, observed and noted details: an old pickup truck parked close to the wall, no ranch signage, and notably no animals or agricultural activity. The ranch was nearly abandoned, but still occupied. This led to the 8th ranch being marked as high suspicion, but authorities still could not conduct a deeper inspection. For the 11th ranch, the sheriff's team could only patrol along the boundary because most of the area was enclosed by high steel fencing, with a double barn inside, 2 old silos, and a low-lying plot that appeared unevenly excavated at first glance. The K-9 showed a mild reaction, but no specific scent could be confirmed from outside the fence. Since this was private land with a history of legal disputes and no one living there directly, police marked the area for a return with a search warrant. After 3 continuous days of sweeping, during which more than 40 hours were dedicated to the strip of land between Lubbock and Slayton, the report concluded that no direct evidence had been found within the accessible areas. However, the 3 ranches that refused entry, the 5th, 8th, and 11th, were all located within the logical travel triangle of a potential suspect wanting to remove Lily from the city undetected. Those locations were flagged with priority symbols in the file: potential involvement, inaccessible. And in a note that later became the most valuable detail, the investigator wrote in the margin, "8th ranch has unusual structures. Storage area shows no activity. Reconsider when conditions allow." But in 2006, there was no legal lead to support a warrant request. The case had no suspect, no confirmed criminal indicators, just a missing person and a few scattered items of evidence. Local judges could not issue warrants based on intuition. Thus, the suspicious locations had to be left behind, recorded in the file as faint notes. The second search wave, though larger in scale, deeper, and more resource-intensive, ended without finding any trace of Lily Ramirez. But the refusals from the 3 landowners, especially the 8th ranch, later identified as the burial site, became signs that the investigation direction was more accurate than they realized. Only at that time, no one had a way to advance further. The lead investigator concluded in the summary report, expanded search yielded negative results. Some potential locations, but inaccessible. Suspicious indicators insufficient for forced entry. Recommend continued passive monitoring. And it was precisely those uncrossed boundaries that caused the most critical lead to be missed for many years. The second search concluded without yielding any new traces, and without providing legal grounds to force the investigation to expand into the refused ranches. In the weeks that followed, the Lubbock Police Department still tried to maintain passive monitoring activities, checking hospital reports, inquiring at bus stations, scanning descriptions of transients, and even cross-referencing with cases in the Texas Panhandle, for any matches in appearance or characteristics with Lily. All results were negative. No new witnesses, no calls reporting a young woman wandering, no activity on bank cards or phone. The cell provider confirmed Lily's phone signal cut off completely at 2:03 a.m. on the night of the disappearance and never reactivated. The collected evidence, a single shoe, a torn backpack strap, a fabric fiber, and faint shoe prints, were merely disconnected fragments insufficient to form a solid hypothesis. The DPS forensic report concluded that in 2006, the fiber was too small for DNA extraction. The backpack strap had no clear fingerprints, the shoe print was not sharp enough to identify the sole pattern, and none of the evidence showed clear signs of assault. No body, no criminal evidence, no specific suspect, and no delayed warrants that could be issued. This was the deadlock that any suspicious missing person case could encounter. Investigators believed something bad had happened, but the law required them to prove it with something more concrete than intuition and reasonable speculation. Pressure from Lily's family grew, but they only heard the same response: "We're doing everything we can, but there's no new information." After the fourth month of the investigation, nearly all leads were exhausted. Joshua Keller, the only person ever on the watch list, was removed from priority because of consistent statements. No suspicious vehicle indicators, and no evidence linking him to the area where Lily's shoe was found beyond owning a vehicle model matching the camera image. The ranches on the outskirts of Sladen remained on passive monitoring, but without any legal basis for warrant requests. Those high suspicion locations ultimately became forgotten red dots on internal maps. In early 2007, the Lubbock Police Department's Special Investigation Office held a final review meeting. They re-examined all evidence, the blurry analog camera footage, the sheriff and DPS search reports, and the witness interview list. Nothing new to analyze. The case could not advance legally without physical evidence or direct testimony. The case did not meet criteria for expansion as a criminal investigation, but was too serious to classify as voluntary disappearance. It was the gray area that any investigative agency dreaded, unable to act, unable to ignore. In March 2007, Lily Ramirez was officially moved to the cold case list of the Lubbock Police Department. Her file was sealed in metal box coded LR0-6112, containing copies of search reports, maps, scene photos, analyzed evidence, and a 27-page summary of the entire initial 5-month investigation. One final note was added before closing the file: no additional evidence, no body recovered, insufficient legal basis for a continued active investigation. File temporarily closed, will reopen upon new information. It was a dry sentence, but it meant what no one said aloud. No one knew if Lily was alive or dead, and her case now depended only on luck, future technological advances, or a mistake by someone, if there truly was someone involved in her disappearance. The silence of 2007 closed the initial investigation phase, not with answers, but with a void that lasted more than a decade. From 2007 to 2010, Lily Ramirez's file remained on the Lubbock Police Department's cold case list, but it was not entirely forgotten. Every quarter, the cold case unit would reopen unsolved files for review, asking whether new technology or information could break the impasse. Lily's case always stayed in the priority group due to its highly suspicious nature. A college student vanishing in just minutes, right after exiting a taxi, leaving very little evidence, but enough to suggest external intervention. However, despite multiple reviews, the file saw no breakthroughs. In early 2008, the cold case unit's first review focused on rechecking initial statements. They reanalyzed recordings of interviews with Lily's friends, the taxi driver, bar staff, and 2 indirect witnesses. Every detail was re-examined for timing. Had anyone misremembered? Had anyone downplayed something? But when comparing statements across sessions and cross-referencing with actual camera timestamps, everything matched at an acceptable level. No internal contradictions large enough to open a new investigative direction. Even the detail about a faint argument sound upon re-evaluation remained classified as unidentified noise because that night was windy with many loose metal sheets rattling. Ultimately, All statements pointed to one thing: Lily stepped out of the taxi, walked into the dark area, and vanished completely within 7 minutes. A rare but not unprecedented occurrence in missing persons cases. 2008 also saw efforts to link Lily's case to others in the region. The Cold Case Unit reviewed 23 missing or assaulted women cases in the Texas Panhandle from 2000 to 2007 for similar behavior patterns or methods, but none matched in timing, location, or modus operandi. Many had clear assault signs, while Lily's had no direct violence at the scene. Others occurred along highways or rural areas, whereas Lily disappeared almost in a residential zone. Notably, no other case featured the repeated appearance of a white vehicle in footage like Lily's. The linking effort failed, and that made her case even harder to handle. It fit no known pattern. In 2009, when the FBI updated the VICAP database, the Cold Case Unit entered Lily's case description. They input factors: young female victim, disappeared in extremely short time, likely forced into a vehicle, no direct witnesses, and sole clue an unusually appearing Elantra. The system returned 3 cases with mild similarities, but quickly ruled them out. 2 in other states with clearer suspect descriptions, and 1 in Amarillo with far more physical evidence. The overlaps were coincidences, not indicators. Meanwhile, the 2006 evidence remained in DPS storage. Reanalysis attempts on the backpack strap, fiber, and shoe sole were limited by era technology. By 2010, DNA techniques were not yet advanced enough to extract samples from the thin fiber found at the scene, which lacked clear cells or biological fluids. The backpack strap showed no usable fingerprints. Lily's single shoe provided no further traces due to soil contamination during collection. Comparing the size 10 male print to any database pattern was impossible because it was too faint, lacking analyzable tread. Each piece of evidence was like a puzzle fragment, but none clear enough to reveal the overall picture. The Cold Case Unit tried re-evaluating the analog camera footage with newer equipment, but original quality was too low. No way to recover license plate or facial details. The white vehicle shape was only sufficient to conclude it possibly was a Hyundai Elantra. But that model was too common across demographics. They even retested the Joshua Keller hypothesis, but all data remained static. Reasonable statements, logical home location, no physical links. In 2010, after 3 years of periodic reviews, the Cold Case Unit concluded Lily's case had no viable investigative paths. Internal records noted no new evidence, no federal or interstate links, no basis for expansion. Re-review of statements found no contradictions. All they had remained the details known since 2006. Nothing added, nothing removed. Lily's case continued to sit in cold cases, like a dormant file among hundreds of others, awaiting technological change or the sudden emergence of new information to break the heavy silence that had lasted more than a decade. In 2011, as image processing technology began shifting strongly to digital platforms, the Cold Case Unit of Lubbock received an assistance request from a research team at the University of Texas at Austin. Those working on a project to restore old magnetic tapes for academic purposes. They had just completed an experimental toolkit capable of digitizing 1990-2000 analog tapes with lower noise levels, while applying motion analysis-based algorithms to enhance clarity. For a case where an analog camera was the only remaining piece that could potentially create a breakthrough, the Cold Case Unit immediately agreed to send a copy of the 4th Street videotape to UT Austin for testing. The original tape had degraded according to the laws of magnetism, showing numerous white noise specks, horizontal streaks, and frame loss during scene transitions. But the research team believed that improving contrast by just 15–20% could reveal movements invisible to the naked eye in the old version. The digitization process took nearly a month, much longer than expected, as they had to separate each frame, filter background noise, balance lighting, and then reassemble it into a complete video. When the first restored version was sent back to Lubbock, the investigation team gathered around the screen, not expecting too much. But right in the first slow-motion playback, they immediately noticed the difference. The silhouette of the white sedan was clearer. the headlight glare less blurred, and most importantly, when the car appeared for the third time, the image inside the cabin was slightly brighter than the original, enough to reveal the faint outline of the driver's face. The frame that had previously been just an indistinct black shadow now had a very small but noteworthy detail. A high nose bridge, thick eyebrows, and a slightly protruding forehead line, though only in silhouette form, not a clear image. The investigators immediately zoomed in on the frame, knowing that digital zoom doesn't add real information, but analyzing the outline could help identify facial structure. In the enhanced brightness version, a bold line of eyebrows appeared above the steering wheel. They were thick, bushy, and positioned lower than normal, a feature very rarely overlooked in descriptive identification. The cold case officer, who had previously interviewed Joshua Keller in 2006, fell silent for a few seconds and then said quietly, "It looks familiar." Another asked, "You think it resembles Keller?" The first didn't answer right away, but the eyes of everyone present turned in the same direction. In their memory, Keller did indeed have thick, dark eyebrows, almost a defining feature. But this was only a physical similarity, a factor always considered insufficient for legal value. The investigation team carefully cross-checked the 2006 file. Keller's statement, his home location, the schedule he described, his cooperative attitude. Everything was reasonable, with no gaps. His vehicle, a 2003 white Elantra, matched the car in the video, but only at a possible level, not definitive. The camera from that year was too blurry to identify the license plate, and the 2011 digitized version only added a few brighter, darker pixels, providing no direct evidence. However, the thick eyebrows in the video made some officers rethink the 2006 interview. Keller was calm to the point of seeming emotionless, answering every question, voluntarily allowing a vehicle check, showing no signs of evasion, but that very calmness, combined with the fact that he was studying criminology, prompted one investigator to question, was that cooperation natural or calculated? Still, this was just psychological speculation, unusable as legal basis. When the cold case unit submitted the video analysis results to the internal legal department, they received the familiar response, not enough to reopen the investigation. The reasons were clearly listed. First, the improved video still did not provide identifiable imagery. Second, no new physical evidence, DNA, or witnesses. Third, no new developments proving Keller was ever at the site where Lily disappeared, and finally no suspicious behavior from Keller in the 4 years following the incident. Keller's record remained completely clean. The investigation team was disappointed, but could not object. In law, a similar silhouette is never considered grounds for reactivating a full investigation. In the context of no body, no new physical evidence, no new statements, any attempt to obtain a search warrant or summon Keller again would be rejected by the court for lack of probable cause. Nevertheless, the digitization results were added to the file as an important note. Cabin shows driver silhouette with thick eyebrows, high nose bridge, features consistent with Keller's 2006 description, however, insufficient for identification. One cold case officer added an unofficial line to the summary, "If this is Keller, then he was very cautious." Though that added note had no legal value, it reflected the common feeling of those who had followed the case from the beginning. They felt they were standing very close to something, but still missing the exact evidence to break through the wall. And since no legal factors had changed, Lily's file continued to sit in cold case, though this time, it was no longer a completely dormant file. The appearance of the driver's silhouette with thick eyebrows in the video had planted a smoldering seed of doubt in the investigators' minds. If that driver was indeed Keller, then why did he appear 3 times around the time Lily went missing? Like every unanswered question, it was recorded, the file closed, and it waited another decade for a possible answer. From 2012 to 2015, as mobile location technology developed rapidly and Texas carriers began storing cell site data under new standards, The cold case unit decided to try an approach they couldn't pursue in 2006, reanalyzing Lily's phone activity on the night she disappeared. The initial file only recorded one piece of information. Lily's phone lost signal at 2:03 a.m., just minutes after the camera captured her final image walking into the dark area. But that was data from primitive location standards, based on the nearest tower, without the ability to pinpoint movement paths or network interactions. By 2012, a new team of technicians from the Lubbock Police Department, working with data analysis experts from Texas DPS, began implementing triangulation refinement algorithms, a method to estimate a device's relative position in weak signal areas based on background noise strength, response time, and latency between towers. This technique was only newly applied in a few major cases at the time, but since Lily's file had so few leads, the cold case unit saw it as a rare opportunity to uncover the missing piece they had never touched in years. They requested the carrier provide all raw data from November 2006, including connection logs, drop times, tower codes, and most importantly, network handshake data that hadn't been analyzed in the initial investigation. When the data arrived, the analysis team took nearly 3 weeks to filter, standardize, and input it into the algorithm. And during this process, they discovered the first detail that shattered the old assumption: Lily's phone did not lose signal at 2:03, as initially recorded, but actually powered off completely about 2 minutes after she left the taxi, around 1:58 a.m., much earlier than previously thought. This meant the entire period from 1:56 to 2:03 was actually just the tower attempting to reconnect to the device unsuccessfully. The phone was turned off or shut off just 2 minutes after Lily appeared on camera, a time frame too short for her to have walked far further, reinforcing the hypothesis that she was interfered with almost immediately. But the more significant result emerged when the algorithm expanded the analysis to all devices connected in the area 15 minutes before and after Lily's phone shut off. In theory, the 4th Street area at midnight had few active devices. In 2006, mobile phone usage wasn't as high as in later decades. So when the system listed devices within a 200-meter radius at the time Lily disappeared, the cold case unit expected only 7 devices. But the results were more surprising. There were exactly 6 devices in the area, and one other device also shut off at the same time as Lily's, differing by just 12 seconds. Such a case, according to technical experts, is very rare without a related factor. 2 devices shutting off in the same time frame, same range, same tower, and both disappearing from the system without reconnecting afterward. This device was logged with an IMEI identifier, but since it wasn't a registered subscriber phone, the carrier only stored it as an anonymous device. Prepaid phones, common among seasonal workers or those not wanting to leave contact traces. The cold case unit labeled this device Device X. They immediately tried cross-referencing Device X with 2006 data, but due to privacy laws at the time, the carrier didn't retain SIM registration records long enough to identify the owner. However, they could still check previous appearances of this device before Lily's disappearance. Results showed Device X appeared only 9 times throughout November, and all 9 were in the Lubbock area, often near campus, the Depot District, and once near the road leading to Slatton. When plotting Device X data on a map, one investigator noticed that its movement path strangely matched the 3 times the white sedan appeared in the video. First near the Depot District, second near the path Lily walked, and third near the blind spot area. Although the cold case unit couldn't prove Device X belonged to the white Elantra driver in the video, the temporal and spatial overlap led them to immediately flag it as the most important lead since 2006. One cold case officer said, "If the car was following Lily, then that person's phone was moving like a shadow right behind." However, despite the promising discovery, the case still couldn't be reopened. No device owner, no legal basis to trace it, and more importantly, the 2012 location data, though better than 2006, was only sufficient to conclude devices were present in the area, not who carried them or if they were in a vehicle. When the report was compiled, The department's legal advisor wrote clearly, "Temporal coincidence cannot be considered evidence. No warrant or summons for suspects based on unidentified data." The cold case unit had to file the results, marking it valuable for future, but couldn't act immediately. Still, the second device shutting off simultaneously with Lily's phone added another layer of new doubt to the file. Lily's disappearance was not simply random. Someone was very close to her, and they turned off their phone in the same moment, as if to vanish into the darkness with her. In 2016, as touch DNA techniques began widespread application in DPS Texas labs, the cold case unit once again considered reanalyzing physical evidence in the Lily Ramirez case. In previous years, attempts to extract DNA from the backpack strap and fabric fibers had failed because the technology then only worked well with samples containing many epithelial cells, blood, or bodily fluids. But touch DNA, though still new and not fully stable, could detect tiny amounts of DNA from skin cells left when someone touched an object, even without strong force. Since the backpack strap was the only item likely pulled, yanked, or brushed against another's hand, the cold case unit submitted a reanalysis request to DPS. The evidence was removed from storage for the first time since 2007. When the lab opened the sealed bag, they noted the strap remained intact as collected. A worn red fabric section, torn at the metal connector, covered in old dirt and preserved with a substance to prevent degradation. Their goal was to determine if any microscopic traces remained on the fabric surface, a skin cell, molecular cluster, or any signal above background threshold. However, 2016 touch DNA, though advanced, still heavily depended on initial biological material quantity. The strap had been exposed outdoors, subjected to strong winds, a factor that could remove skin cells in minutes, making analysis even harder. When technicians sampled the surface layer, they divided the strap into 4 test zones near the tear, middle section, metal contact area, and the dustiest part. After multiple extraction rounds, initial results were nearly disappointing. 3 of 4 zones showed no clear DNA signal or background noise too high to isolate. But in the 4th zone, the dustiest, the analyzer detected a faint signal, not enough for a full profile, but sufficient to confirm DNA from 2 different sources, a stronger signal matching Lily's personal reference sample, and a very weak one, under 10% of the total, classified as unknown. This meant besides Lily, someone else had touched the strap. However, the DNA level was too low to sequence fully. It couldn't be entered into CODIS, compared to any suspect, or used in court. But on the other hand, it opened a new horizon the case had never had. For the first time in 10 years, physical evidence showed direct contact by another person with Lily's belongings on the night she disappeared. The cold case unit immediately requested DPS try enhanced analysis with LCN technique. But the lab refused, because in 2016, LCN was not yet approved in Texas for criminal investigations due to cross-contamination risks and high error rates. They could only record mixed DNA, primarily Lily's, with minor component insufficient for identification. Legally, this was still zero. Investigation-wise, it was the first ray of hope. Since no further progress was possible with current technology, DPS placed Lily's evidence in the high-priority sample, pending future technology category, meaning samples specially stored, awaiting next-generation DNA tech. This list only included cases likely solvable with stronger technology, and Lily's file being added meant scientists believed that faint DNA could one day become the decisive piece. One technician noted in the internal report, if someone touched the strap besides Lily, that could be the person who approached her at the time of disappearance. The cold case unit understood the note's meaning, but they also knew that in 2016, they could do nothing more than store the evidence, close the file, and wait for the next forensic advancement. For over a decade, Lily's case remained the same: no body, no suspect, no statements. But now, for the first time, they had a microscopic trace, faint but real, showing the presence of a second person. And that alone made the case no longer just a name on the cold case list. From 2017 to 2019, As geographic profiling techniques were widely applied in criminal behavior analysis across many states, the Lubbock Cold Case Unit decided to apply this method to the Lily Ramirez disappearance, a case that for over 10 years had no breakthroughs beyond the faint DNA signal on the backpack strap. GP is particularly useful in cases with no body, no clear crime scene, but with scattered event points, such as Lily's last sighting location, where the shoe was found, K9 search direction, and the white sedan's movement path in the analog camera. GP's purpose is to identify the behavioral center zone, likely linked to the suspect, often where they live, work, or frequently pass. The cold case unit input all case data into GP software: time Lily left the taxi, camera coverage radius, shoe location, wind direction that night, dirt roads leading to slatted outskirts, denied access ranch areas, and especially the 3 appearances of the white Elantra. After nearly 3 weeks of simulation, the software produced a heat map, behavioral hotspot map, with 3 deep red zones, first around 4th Street, second along eastern dirt roads, and third, most important, 1.1 to 1.4 miles east-northeast from the starting point. When investigators looked at the center coordinates of the 3rd red zone, the meeting room fell silent for a few seconds. It was exactly the residential area where Joshua Keller once lived, just 1.2 miles from the camera capturing Lily's final image. Those coordinates matched almost perfectly with the anchor point GP predicted if the suspect stalked Lily by car, approached quickly, removed the victim from the urban area, and moved downwind to reduce traces. The veteran investigator who met Keller in 2006 sighed, "We're back to square one." But in 2017, no one thought it was mere coincidence. GP is considered one of the most accurate criminal behavior analysis tools, and this behavioral hotspot overlapped exactly with the only address seriously considered in the initial investigation. The analysis team further expanded the model with new data, appearance points of device X, the anonymous phone that shut off simultaneously with Lily's. Adding this made the behavior model even clearer. Device X appeared multiple times around campus and Depot District, but had 4 movements near the white car's recorded paths, and in all 4, the overlaps were within 500 meters of Keller's old home. Spatial distribution analysis showed that assuming device X belonged to the same person driving the white car, that person's home base was very close to Keller. This didn't prove Keller was the suspect, but GP placed him in the behavioral center zone, no longer a vague name among 32 Elantra owners, but the only one fully overlapping all 3 model hotspots. The cold case unit began compiling a potential suspect list based on behavioral, geographic, and phone data analysis. The initial list had 14 people, those living in hot zones, owning white cars, or with suspicious 2006 movements. But cross-referencing demographics, residency history, Lubbock presence time, and mobile device frequency near the scene left only 5 meeting criteria for suspicion. The 5 names were coded internally to prevent leaks: S1, S2, S3, S4, and S5. Among them, S5 was Keller. The cold case unit couldn't hide their unease. They had stood before Keller in 2006, seen him as cooperative, removed him from the list to focus elsewhere, and now every analysis path led back to the start, as if the case had always revolved around an axis they never truly grasped. Deeper analysis of the 5 suspects showed the other 4 had weaknesses. S1 wasn't in Lubbock that night per university records. S2 owned a white car but different sedan model, not matching video features. S3 had no mobile device shutting off with Lily's. S4 lived too far from GP zone. Only Keller, S5, matched every model factor: home distance to scene, logical movement path, car type, faint facial features in video, and device X coincidences. One behavioral analyst wrote in the report, "If this model is accurate, the suspect is likely someone familiar with the area, moving purposefully, unobtrusively, and capable of quick handling. This profile fits Keller." However, this conclusion was professional only, without legal value. Though the cold case unit wanted to reopen the file, They had no authority to summon Keller based solely on probability models. No DNA, no new physical evidence, no witnesses. All they had was intersecting curves on a map, sharp logic but insufficient to prove crime. But since 2019, Keller was no longer just a name from the Elantra owners list. He was officially reclassified as a person of interest, marked red in the electronic file, and categorized POI Category B. Person of interest, Level 2, for long-term monitoring cases. After over a decade, Keller's name reappeared on the Lubbock Police Department's meeting table. But this time, it wasn't easily crossed off as before. 2020 marked a pivotal turning point, not only for Texas forensic science, but also for the entire process of solving cold cases that had lingered for over a decade. In February of that year, DPS Austin officially received the next-generation DNA analysis system, a CQ Lyra machine combining MPS technology and an ultra-low sample processing platform, allowing DNA extraction from amounts of biological material that just a few years earlier had been considered unanalyzable. This technology could amplify DNA from microscopic skin cells left behind, even on evidence exposed to the elements for years. As soon as the announcement reached regional laboratories, DPS Lubbock immediately submitted a list of 12 priority cases for reanalysis using the new technology, and the Lily Ramirez file, with the backpack strap that had yielded a faint DNA signal in 2016, was ranked as priority number 1. For the cold case unit, 2020 brought the first strong enough hope to believe that the Lily case could break through the wall of silence that had lasted over 14 years. The evidence was transferred from storage to DPS Austin in early March, accompanied by all the old examination documents, crime scene diagrams, photos of the strap, and the 2016 faint touch DNA report. When the sealed bag LR06112 was opened in the positive pressure lab, 3 forensic technicians stood watching. The strap, despite the long passage of time, still bore traces of old dirt, frayed edges on the fabric, and a broken metal buckle. But what they focused on most was not the physical appearance, but the DNA potential somewhere on the fabric surface. This time, they did not use the manual extraction method as in previous years. The new system allowed scanning the evidence surface at the molecular level, using cold ion beams to scan multiple layers and collect every trace of skin cells, even those dehydrated and nearing decomposition. Every millimeter of the strap was divided into 48 scan points. Each point was placed in a micro tray and loaded into the MPS machine for amplification. Due to the special nature of the old sample, technicians had to maintain absolute cross-contamination controls. The lab shut down the circulating ventilation system, sealed the sterile work floor, and restricted personnel movement to avoid environmental DNA contamination. Raw results began appearing after nearly 36 hours of analysis. Of the 48 scan points, 45 yielded no significant signals, either blown away by wind since 2006 or due to fabric oxidation. But the remaining 3 points displayed clearly separated DNA segments, far superior to the 2016 touch DNA data. 2 of the 3 points matched perfectly with Lily's reference DNA, as expected. But at point number 17, the location closest to the torn edge of the strap, a mixed signal appeared, many times stronger than the previous faint signal. Notably, the minor DNA background accounted for 23% of the total sample, a ratio sufficient for in-depth analysis, SNP chain separation, and preliminary profiling. This was something DPS had never achieved before with the Lily case evidence. The technicians began separating the minor DNA sample, running it through combinatorial filters, then into the sequencing algorithm. They knew a full profile would require more samples, but even a partial profile held immense forensic value for future comparisons. In the initial analysis phase, results only simulated 18 SNP loci, not enough to identify an individual, but sufficient to determine gender and some biological traits. When the data table appeared, the technician team noted the minor DNA was male. This confirmed that the person who touched Lily's strap was not a woman, completely ruling out cross-contamination from the female friends group or initial evidence handlers. However, since the profile was incomplete, DPS temporarily stored the minor DNA sample in the system for future comparisons. For the cold case unit, knowing the second person was male did not solve the case immediately, but it reinforced two key hypotheses. Lily had been approached by a man, and this man likely grabbed, pulled, or yanked the backpack strap, leaving skin cells at the torn edge. More importantly, for the first time in the case history, they had a clear enough minor DNA sample for analysis. And with MPS technology, they knew that with a suitable comparison sample, even a partial one, the 23% DNA signal could be fully profiled. The cold case unit recorded in the May 2020 report, DPS has established male DNA on the victim's backpack strap. This is the first physical evidence proving intervention by a second person. Recommend prioritizing retesting of all remaining evidence once SQ-Lyra calibration is complete. After 14 years, a tiny fragment of DNA had completely changed the case status. No longer just guesses or GP models, but real biological evidence existing on the item, waiting to be matched to the identity of some man who, from that night in 2006, had stepped into the darkness with Lily. 2021 opened the decisive chapter in the Lily Ramirez case. When DPS Austin completed SQ-Lyra calibration and began running expanded analysis on the entire minor DNA trace obtained from the backpack strap. The partial profile from 2020, consisting of only 18 SNP loci, was now processed through deep MPS sequencing combined with mitochondrial DNA comparison, a technique used for heavily degraded or extremely small samples, particularly effective in long-standing cases. mtDNA does not absolutely identify individuals like nuclear DNA, but it can significantly narrow the suspect pool due to its maternal inheritance. After running enhancement models, DPS obtained 37 clear mtDNA SNP loci for database comparison. Most traced common North American haplogroups, but 3 rare mutations, a combination appearing in less than 0.01% of the population. When the minor mtDNA profile was entered into the expanded CODIS system, the software returned a single match in the Texas State Database. A reference sample belonging to Joshua Keller, submitted when he applied to study criminology at Texas Tech in 2005, as required by a criminal lab internship program at the time. This match immediately shocked the cold case unit. Though mtDNA cannot conclude absolutely like nuclear DNA, the match across 37 loci, including 3 rare mutations, reduced exclusion probability to extremely low, below 1 in 8 billion. That meant the minor DNA on the backpack strap very likely belonged to Keller or someone in his maternal line. But in Keller's residency and demographic records, he lived alone in Lubbock in 2006, with no close relatives in the area. The cold case unit immediately held an emergency meeting. What they had suspected for years, from the figure in the video, home location matching behavioral hotspots, overlap with device X movement, now gained support from the first biological evidence. The cold case leader noted in the minutes, mtDNA does not prove Keller was at the crime scene, but proves he touched the victim's evidence very close to the time of disappearance. A short sentence, but enough to shift the case from a 15-year cold case to active investigation. In March 2021, Lubbock Police Department formally requested federal assistance from FBI Field Office Dallas under Major Case Assistance, seeking behavioral analysis, mobile device data, and assessment of whether Keller moved Lily's body outside city limits. The FBI agreed immediately after reviewing the mtDNA file. A team of 3 agents, specializing in behavioral and no-body homicide cases, was dispatched to Lubbock. Reviewing the full 2006 timeline, 4th Street camera, 3 appearances of the white Elantra, dirt path where Lily's shoe was found, the FBI particularly noted that Keller's phone from that year had no collected data. Since device X had appeared around Keller's residence area, the FBI proposed using anonymized ID analysis to reconstruct Device X movement in November 2006. They viewed the mtDNA match as a turning point, but still needed additional evidence for probable cause to search Keller's current home. Nonetheless, the atmosphere in Lubbock PD meetings had completely changed. For 15 years they had only guesses, but now they had DNA. Even mtDNA, linking Keller to the only evidence item pulled, yanked or touched the night Lily vanished. The FBI recommended immediate re-interview of Keller, but Lubbock PD proceeded cautiously. If Keller sensed surveillance or knew about the DNA match, he could destroy remaining evidence, relocate, or erase traces on lands he accessed in 2006. So they opted for undercover investigation. Keller was now 39, living in Amarillo, working as an IT technician for a technology distribution company. He had a clean record, no convictions, no significant traffic violations, all making investigation harder, as he appeared a normal citizen unrelated to crime. But the FBI argued that some first-time abduction or murder offenders have clean records, especially when the crime is impulsive but well concealed. Moreover, Keller's criminology studies raised suspicion he might know how to avoid leaving traces. In the joint report, the FBI wrote, "The mtDNA match, combined with behavioral patterns and geographic data, makes Keller the primary suspect. Recommend active investigation." On June 18, 2021, the Lily Ramirez case was reclassified from cold case to active major investigation. Joshua Keller's name was moved to primary suspect in the internal system, and all related documents from the past 15 years were compiled into a separate file, preparing for the next step. After 15 years, Keller's name was no longer just an outer circle hypothesis. For the first time, the law had biological evidence linking him to the victim's evidence, and that was the biggest piece making the investigation wheel turn again. Immediately after Joshua Keller was identified as the primary suspect in 2021, the first step in the active investigation was re-examining his entire 2006 statement, a seemingly simple process that quickly revealed major contradictions, so significant that the cold case unit wondered why they had been overlooked. In his initial statement, Keller said that on the night of November 13, 2006, he went to the Texas Tech Library from around 10 p.m. until nearly midnight, meeting a classmate who could confirm his presence. But when the FBI and Lubbock PD cross-checked this with university data and library access logs still retained by the school, they discovered Keller had not swiped his card into the library that night. The 2006 entry Slacksit data, though not 100% complete, clearly showed no card swipes matching Keller's ID between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. This directly contradicted his claim of being in the library for 2 hours. When the FBI located the classmate Keller mentioned, the person admitted knowing Keller but said he did not meet him at the library that night. He added, "We weren't close enough to study together or meet outside class. I'm certain I wasn't at the library that night." Lubbock PD noted this as the first serious contradiction, and more importantly, deliberate creation of a false alibi during the initial investigation. Not stopping there, the team reanalyzed phone data using the 2015 technology process, Device X signal locations. Overlaying Device X movement on Keller's stated map, they found that at 3 critical times, around 1:48 a.m., 1:53 a.m., and 2:02 a.m., the anonymous device moved along routes Keller had confirmed he never took. This was not absolute proof Device X belonged to Keller, but combined with his false schedule, it formed strong logic. If Keller had no real alibi, the obvious question was where he was during Lily's disappearance window. The FBI expanded by checking Keller's vehicle history through DMV. They found his 2003 white Hyundai Elantra was sold in February 2010, just months before UT Austin began. Just months before UT Austin began digitizing the case camera videos. Selling the car after nearly 4 years without investigation progress could be coincidence. But the timing was too precise to ignore. Investigators noted Keller did not buy a comparable new car afterward. Instead, he switched to company or rental vehicles, minimizing personal ownership. This is behavior often seen in suspects aware their vehicle might hold old evidence. When the FBI contacted the Elantra's new owner, they learned it had been sold multiple times across states and finally scrapped in 2016. No chance to collect samples from the car, a major loss, but also a sign Keller may have acted to eliminate evidence. Further analyzing Keller's November 2006 movement via bank data, the FBI noted no credit card use from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next day, almost exactly overlapping Lily's disappearance time. This did not convict Keller, but made his "I went home and slept early" claim more suspicious. In the behavioral analysis, the FBI wrote, Keller provided an unverifiable and contradictory alibi with objective data. High behavioral risk level. Combined with mtDNA match, Keller is the highest probability suspect. The cold case unit realized what they lacked legal grounds to say for 15 years. Keller never truly had an alibi. Everything he said lacked witness confirmation, documentation, or data logs. And the new pieces, mtDNA, GP, Device X, vehicle history, now converge to suggest his 2006 statement may have been designed to mislead from the start. With that conclusion, Lubbock PD moved the file to the warrant preparation phase and decided to expand Keller investigation to an unprecedented level. From the moment Joshua Keller's alibi was completely dismantled, Lubbock PD and the FBI shifted to the most critical phase, consolidating every layer of evidence into probable cause, strong enough for an arrest warrant. This was a step impossible 15 years earlier, but in 2021, as technology, data, and behavioral analyses converged on one point, they knew this opportunity could not slip away. The first coordination meeting at Lubbock PD headquarters took place in a secure room with all files from 2006 to 2021 laid out in stacks, red marked for key data and yellow for supporting. The FBI required separating all evidence into 5 groups: DNA, tower data, camera, scene evidence, and re-forensic analysis. The DNA group served as the pillar, mtDNA match to Keller, with exclusion below 1 in 8 billion. Complete chain of custody, flawless technical analysis description, with no legal vulnerabilities, and notably, the DPS report stating the minor DNA on the strap evidence may suggest physical contact in a context consistent with assault or coercion. The Tower Analysis Group added a vital layer. Device X movement in November 2006 overlapped the white car video route, Keller's residence area, and especially shut off at the same time as Lily's phone. FBI wireless experts wrote, the timing overlap between the two devices is statistically unusual and suggests interaction. The camera group further weighted the file. Both 2006 analog and 2011 digitized videos showed the white Hyundai Elantra circling the area 3 times before Lily's disappearance. The driver's figure had thick eyebrows similar to Keller, and most importantly, vehicle stops matched exactly when Lily entered the blind spot. Though video did not identify identity, it played a key role in arguing target stalking behavior. The scene evidence group included Lily's left shoe, torn backpack strap, gray fabric fibers, and size 10 male shoe prints. After 2020-21 forensic reanalysis, the FBI assessed these as consistent with a sudden rear approach, pulling items, and controlling the victim in an extremely short time. The expanded forensic group also included GP software with 3 red behavioral zones centered on Keller's residence, plus FBI BAU behavioral analysis, concluding suspect exhibits high emotional control, understanding of investigation processes, short duration action, and location selection, fitting a prepared offender model. When all 15 years of data were merged, the FBI and Lubbock PD began building the arrest warrant affidavit, an unusually thick file, 200 pages, including detailed timeline, maps, scene photos, forensic analysis, mtDNA tables, positioning models, behavioral diagrams, and summary of false alibi. The version for the judge presented clear logic. 1. Lily was approached just 2 minutes after leaving the taxi. 2. The only interacted evidence contained forced male DNA. 3. This male mtDNA matched Keller. 4. White car behavior and GP model placed Keller at the behavioral center. 5. Keller's alibi. Contradicted library and phone data. 6. Keller sold the 2003 car in 2010 before video digitization. 7. Keller is the only suspect matching all investigation data streams, camera, DNA, tower, geography, and behavior. The FBI noted at the end, Keller is the only suspect capable of committing the crime without clear physical traces, consistent with criminology knowledge. When the file was submitted to the Lubbock County judge in September 2021, the judge took 3 days to review it all, and on the morning of the third day, he signed the arrest warrant for Joshua Keller based on the aggregate of DNA evidence, digital data, and behavioral analysis, sufficiently establishes strong probable cause to believe the suspect is directly involved in Lily Ramirez's disappearance. After 15 years, for the first time, Texas law officially identified a suspect, and the name on that warrant was none other than Joshua Keller, the man who stood before police in 2006 with suspiciously calm demeanor, now the center of the largest manhunt Lubbock PD had ever conducted for a cold case. On the morning of September 22, 2021, before the sun had fully risen over Amarillo, the FBI execution team, coordinating with the Lubbock PD, approached Joshua Keller's apartment at the Sunrise Meadows complex. The arrest warrant and search warrant were executed simultaneously to prevent any risk of Keller destroying documents or electronic devices. The approach took place precisely at 5:42 a.m., a time when people are typically in a drowsy state and slow to react quickly. When the agents knocked on the door and clearly announced their identity, Keller appeared wearing a thin t-shirt. His expression stunned upon hearing Lily Ramirez's name read in the warrant. There was no resistance, but his eyes, cold, with a brief constriction of the pupils, prompted one agent to immediately note in the report, inappropriate emotional response. After handcuffing him and ensuring Keller was transported to headquarters in accordance with procedure, the search team began operations at the scene. Keller's apartment was unusually clean. There was no clutter, no personal photos, no sentimental items. One agent remarked, "The place has nothing that reveals anything about the person living here." This is commonly seen in suspects who deliberately leave no traces of behavior or life history to avoid detection. In the small workroom, where a gray wooden desk and a swivel chair were placed, they seized an old desktop computer, a Lenovo laptop, 3 external hard drives, and a box containing numerous vintage electronic devices, particularly several 2000s-era flip phones and 2 smartphones from 2011-2013 with their SIM cards removed. These items were packaged into evidence bags E22A through E22G, but the item that drew the most attention from the search team was in the third drawer of the desk, a stack of printed color maps, the kind of offline maps used by terrain researchers or surveyors before the smartphone era. The stack covered the Lubbock, Slatton, Post area, with each sheet marked in red X symbols or pencil circles around dirt roads, farm areas, and unmarked trails not shown on public maps. Among them, one map printed in November 2006 had 3 markings that matched the locations where search teams had previously found Lily's shoe, where the K9 units lost the scent, and the farm that had refused entry. The forensic agent immediately photographed each page, backed them up, and sealed the originals. On the right margins of several maps were notations that the FBI BAU assessed as behavioral abbreviations: RZ = risk zone, VD = vantage depression, S2 = second approach. This suggested that Keller had analyzed the terrain in a structured manner, possibly before or after Lily's disappearance. In another drawer, they found a typed document titled Applied Victimology Notes, not university materials, but Keller's personal notes on victim psychology in sudden approach scenarios. The beginning resembled academic material, but later sections were subjective observations. Young victims tend to freeze for 1-3 seconds when blocked. If pulling an item from behind, The initial reaction is not screaming but maintaining balance. Approximately 30-45 seconds is the optimal window to move the target out of sight. These were no longer student criminology notes. They resembled notes from someone analyzing real-world victim approaches. In the closet, they found a clear plastic box storing various small items. Old keychains, employee badges from years prior, and a zip bag containing crumpled gray fabric scraps. These scraps matched the color of the unusual fibers recovered at the 2006 scene. Though forensic analysis was needed for confirmation, the search team immediately recognized this as potentially critical evidence. One agent whispered, "If it matches, this is the final piece of the puzzle." In the bedroom, nothing noteworthy except a small bookshelf filled with criminology books, criminal psychology texts, and two on terrain analysis, fields perfectly aligned with the suspect profile the FBI had suspected. On the nightstand was a notebook with a few short, non-thematic entries. Do not let emotions interfere. Maintain distance. Do not return to the area. Do not create digital traces. These lines weighed heavily on the investigation, as if Keller was reminding himself of principles for evading detection. When the digital forensics team examined the laptop, they discovered in the cache numerous deleted files with remnants, offline Google Earth maps of the Lubbock area from 2006, a text file named Entry Points, and an aerial photo of an eastern dirt road matching the location where Lily's shoe was found. Nothing directly self-incriminating, but the overall evidence formed an alarming behavioral pattern. In the box of old phones, a 2004 flip phone, with the battery removed, had an IMEI matching the device recorded in the tower logs for device X. This did not immediately prove Keller owned the device in 2006, but it strengthened suspicions that he had used anonymous phones alongside his primary device. After completing the search, all evidence was transferred to DPS Austin and FBI Quantico for in-depth analysis. A veteran agent noted in the end-of-day report, the apartment showed no violence, no chaos, but every sign of someone concealing behavior over a long period. What was recovered was not random. These are psychological, behavioral, and geographical indicators matching the suspect profile we've outlined for 15 years. Keller was taken to the interrogation room at Lubbock PD, but the journey to cracking the case did not end there. For what was found in the apartment had only opened the next chapter in the unit's longest investigation. Interrogation Room 3 at Lubbock PD was kept at a slightly low temperature, applying environmental technique to observe physical reactions, when Joshua Keller was seated, hands uncuffed but posture controlled by two agents standing behind him. He wore a gray t-shirt, hair neatly combed, face calm, to a degree that unsettled the investigators who had followed the case for 15 years. When one investigator opened with a simple question, "Do you know why you're here?" Keller responded immediately, without hesitation or defensiveness. "I don't know, but I'm certain I haven't done anything wrong." This opening was noted by the FBI BAU as a common indicator of a suspect attempting to establish psychological safe ground early. In the first 10 minutes, Keller maintained absolute calm. He said he had never met Lily Ramirez, never driven through 4th Street that day, never approached any woman on the night of November 13, 2006. When the investigator mentioned that he had lived just over 1 mile from the scene, Keller replied in an even, slightly dry tone, "Thousands of people live within that radius." No startle, no change in breathing, no signs of fear. But it was precisely this absolute calm that struck the investigator as abnormal. An innocent person suddenly arrested typically shows confusion, anger, or panic. Keller sat straight-backed, eyes barely blinking, as if participating in a pre-prepared test. When the investigator placed the Met DNA evidence on the table, Keller showed no change in expression. He simply said, "Met DNA doesn't prove anything. It could belong to anyone." This response caused the observation team behind the glass to exchange glances. An ordinary suspect would not so readily point out the weakness of Met DNA evidence. But Keller had studied criminology. He knew how to respond. The investigator shifted to behavioral confrontation, asking about the history of the Hyundai Elantra he once owned. When asked why he sold the car in 2010, Keller replied. The car broke down. I got a different one. But the investigator presented DMV records showing Keller did not buy a new car immediately after selling it, instead using a company vehicle for nearly 3 years. Keller slightly shifted posture, crossing his arms over his chest. This was the first defensive reaction since the interrogation began. The investigator noted a small change in facial contours in the initial seconds after the question, a sign of discomfort. However, Keller quickly regained composure and said, I used the company car because it was convenient, that's all. The investigator did not directly rebut but moved to emphasize the alibi contradiction. You stated in 2006 you were at the library from 10 p.m. to midnight. But entry exit data does not record you. Keller paused, breathing for half a second. A small detail, but the investigator saw it clearly. I don't remember exactly, that was 15 years ago, Keller said. But when the investigator pointed out that the classmate he used as an alibi denied meeting him that night, Keller blinked several times faster than normal. In-depth body language analysis calls this stress microblink, an unconscious reaction when confronted with something known to be false. Still, Keller denied, maybe I misremembered. I'm certain I didn't do anything wrong. The investigator shifted to the offline maps seized from Keller's apartment, particularly those marking the Slayton area and dirt roads. When placing the maps on the table, Keller leaned slightly forward but quickly leaned back. The investigator asked, what did you use these symbols for? RZ, S2, Vantage Zone. These aren't random student notes. Keller replied immediately. Simulation exercises for terrain analysis class. The investigator knew this answer was false, but lacked direct evidence to refute it yet. Instead, they allowed silence to stretch, a highly effective psychological pressure on disciplined suspects who must organize responses. Keller said nothing more. He crossed his arms tighter. Lips slightly pressed, shoulders lightly tensed. Body language shifted from defensive to frozen. The investigator changed tactics, emphasizing the timing of Lily's disappearance and the unique opportunity to explain. Joshua, you know we've been on this case for 15 years. If you're innocent, this is the time to tell the truth. If you don't speak now, everything we found in your apartment this morning will stand against you. Keller looked directly at the investigator. I don't know that girl. I'm not involved. You're wasting your time. The response lacked tremor, but the voice was harder, less controlled. A sign Keller was beginning to feel pressure. The investigator tried one final tactical pivot in the first round. No one is asking if you killed Lily. We're just asking why your DNA was on her backpack strap. This question was designed to unlock unconscious reactions. Keller paused unusually long, blinked twice, took a slightly longer breath. But then he replied, that's not possible. My DNA isn't there. The absolute denial, despite the existing forensic report, was noted as reality denial, common in suspects trying to create distance from objective evidence. After 2 hours of the first round, Keller did not confess or slip up, but he revealed internal contradictions, signs of stress, and micro-reactions that the FBI deemed sufficient to continue pressure in subsequent rounds. The final report for the round stated clearly, no direct progress achieved, but Keller's psychological reactions confirm he cannot sustain his innocent narrative long-term. Tactics need adjustment to focus on identified behavioral weaknesses and contradictions. Round 1 ended without a confession, but for the investigators, it was not a failure, merely the foundation for the next phase of pressure. When the second interrogation round began, the room was kept dimmer, with only one investigator sitting directly across from Keller, while 2 FBI agents observed from behind the one-way glass. The investigator placed a thick envelope on the table, gently turning it toward Keller, but not opening it immediately, creating anticipation that forced the subject to imagine what was coming. Joshua, the investigator said, in a neutral tone. We're going to show you why you're here today. Keller sat slightly leaned back, hands interlocked on the table, but his thumbs began lightly rubbing together, a small movement lasting only seconds, but clearer than any reaction he had shown in the first round. The investigator opened the envelope, pulling out a color printout labeled, Mitochondrial DNA, DPS Austin report, placing it directly in front of Keller. This, the investigator said, is the analysis of DNA from Lily Ramirez's backpack strap. The secondary sample, DNA not belonging to the victim, matches your mitochondrial profile, with 3 rare mutations, exclusion probability, under 1 in 8 billion. Keller looked down, but instead of scrutinizing each line like an innocent person seeking to prove a mistake, he only glanced over it before looking up, face hardening, jaw slightly clenching, a sign of facial muscle tightening. "Made DNA doesn't prove anything," he repeated, but this time his voice was drier, lacking the inherent calm from the previous round. The investigator noted this change with a brief glance toward the glass. "Joshua," the investigator said slowly, "you know very well what mitochondrial DNA means. You've studied criminology. You know a stranger couldn't leave a perfect match on 3 rare mutations without direct contact with the strap." Keller looked away, an instinctive avoidance movement. The investigator turned over the second file. Enhanced 2011 prints of the analog 4th Street camera footage. In it, the shadow of a white Hyundai Elantra appeared 3 times, circling the area where Lily was dropped off. "Does anything look familiar?" the investigator asked. Keller narrowed his eyes, but not to focus, more as a defensive reaction. "No," he replied. "I don't remember anything related to that car." The investigator revealed another photo, this time an enlargement of the driver's side shadow. Though the image was unclear, the thick, low eyebrows casting shadows under streetlights created a notable resemblance to Keller's face. When the investigator placed the photo at the table's edge, directly in Keller's line of sight, he immediately turned his face away, crossing his arms over his chest, a clearly stronger defensive posture than the previous round. "You said you weren't driving that night," the investigator continued. "But Device X moved along the same route as this car, and the IMAI of Device X matches the disassembled flip phone we seized from your apartment this morning." For the first time since his arrest, Keller inhaled sharply and strongly, unable to conceal it. In that moment, the FBI noted, the subject had temporarily lost psychological balance. When the investigator pressed, "Joshua, you can't explain the coincidence between the DNA, the movement route, and the anonymous device," Keller raised a hand to rub his face, a gesture indicating emotional overload or internal pressure. He could no longer maintain the cold stare from the previous round. "You're trying to force me into a story," Keller said. But this time his voice trembled slightly. The investigator did not argue. Instead, he pushed the files aside and leaned back in his chair, creating empty space in front of Keller, a psychological tactic designed to make the suspect feel compelled to fill the silence. But Keller remained quiet. He allowed the silence to stretch nearly 15 seconds, a very long time in interrogation. During that silence, Keller began tapping his foot, then abruptly stopped, then resumed, clear signs of tension. The investigator changed tactics. "Joshua, I'm not asking what you did. I'm just asking if you touched Lily's strap." Keller blinked rapidly 3 times in succession, a micro-reaction signaling internal conflict. An innocent person typically responds immediately with strong affirmation. But Keller did not answer. The investigator added another layer of evidence. The offline maps seized from the apartment, the RZVD, IS2 notations, and markings matching 2006 search areas. "How do you explain your maps having precise marks at 3 locations tied to Lily's disappearance, including the farm that refused police entry?" Keller slightly bowed his head, right hand lightly gripping the table edge, a gesture the BAU calls anchoring, when a suspect needs a physical anchor to maintain emotional control. But Keller only said, "I don't know. I don't remember what I marked." The investigator leaned forward. "Joshua, you're very intelligent. You understand that from now on, every piece of evidence will undergo forensic testing, fabric traces, maps, phones, hard drive scans. Right now, there's only one thing we want to hear from you. Why is your DNA on the backpack strap of a girl who vanished at 1:56 a.m.? Keller looked down at the table, lips pressed together, throat swallowing subtly. For the first time in the entire interrogation, he neither rebutted nor denied. He simply remained silent, eyes fixed on the space between his hands. The investigator allowed the silence to continue, without interrupting. That void stretched long enough that Keller was forced to create an escape. He raised his eyes, and in a fleeting moment, the investigator saw something the 15-year investigation had never witnessed. A crack beginning in the layer of defense. But then Keller said, almost exhaling, "I don't know anything about that girl. I didn't do anything." A denial, but no longer with the sharp tone of before. The investigator noted this small disintegration, knowing that silence and evidence were doing their work. The second interrogation round ended without a confession, but with something more important. Joshua Keller had begun losing control of the story he had maintained in his mind for 15 years. The investigators knew they could not stop here, because a person refusing to face the evidence is one whom the truth is beginning to surround. The third round of interrogation began in the afternoon. When Keller was brought back to room 3, after nearly 2 hours sitting alone in the monitored waiting room, without access to his phone, unaware of developments outside, with only time to confront the pressure gradually tightening. As soon as he entered, Keller observed the room's setup. A new investigator, brighter lighting, a thick stack of documents placed right in the center of the table. This was no longer an interrogation based on psychology or micro-reactions. This was a data-driven round, where every denial from Keller would be dismantled by numbers he could not twist. This time, the investigator did not start with a question, but with a statement. "We're going to talk about the mobile location logs from the night of November 13, 2006. Keller did not respond, but his breathing changed slightly. A quarter-second pause upon hearing the phrase, "location logs." The investigator opened the file, flipping to a page printed with a grid map from cell tower data, analyzed using a movement reconstruction algorithm. This, the investigator placed the sheet in front of Keller, is Lily's phone signal. This, he placed a second sheet, is the signal from an unidentified device we're calling Device X. Keller looked down cautiously, but did not touch the papers. The investigator continued. "We recovered old data from the carriers, and with new techniques, we were able to reconstruct locations based on signal fluctuation patterns. Device X moved along the exact route the Elantra was captured on camera. But the most notable part is this, the shutdown point." The investigator circled a precise timestamp with a pen, 1 hour 56 minutes and 42 seconds a.m. Just 30 seconds after Lily stepped out of the taxi. "Lily's phone shut off here," he said, "and Device X shut off at the exact same moment, within a 200-meter radius." Keller stared at the circled mark, his eyes narrowing slightly. He gave a faint smile, an unnatural one. Coincidence. Someone else turned off their phone at the same time. The investigator did not rebut. He turned to the next page, a signal comparison chart. "Joshua, there are thousands of people in Lubbock, but only one device shut off at the same time as the victim's phone, in the same area, and then reappeared near where you lived that year." Keller did not reply, but breathed deeper. The investigator leaned forward, voice lower. "That phone belonged to you." Keller responded quickly, "No," but the reaction was too fast, almost cutting off the investigator's words, revealing that his effort to control the situation was cracking. The investigator shifted from data attack to behavioral analysis, a technique used when a suspect begins to waver but has not yet told the truth. "Joshua, you studied criminology. You know that turning off a phone is intentional behavior. Innocent people don't turn off their phones right when a victim disappears. Innocent people don't appear on the behavioral map at the geographic hotspot." Keller crossed his arms tighter, shoulders tensing. The investigator pressed deeper. "You said you weren't driving that night, but cameras captured 3 passes of a white car circling the area. Device X moved similarly. Your DNA is on the backpack strap, and your alibi has been inconsistent from start to finish." Keller closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if calculating his next response. When he opened them, he regained his even tone. You're interpreting everything to incriminate me. I wasn't involved in that. The investigator placed another sheet in front of Keller, an FBI BAU behavioral analysis photo. Do you know what this is? Keller did not answer. This is a motive profile, the investigator said, built from your search history, your academic record, notes you wrote about victim reactions, and offline maps in your apartment. Keller's eyes widened more, the first fleeting sign of fear appearing. The investigator continued, a normal student doesn't research panic responses in the first 30-45 seconds. A normal person doesn't mark dirt roads and label them risk zone. A normal person doesn't keep an anonymous phone for years. Keller murmured softly, almost inaudible, I don't remember. The investigator immediately noted the statement. Someone who says, I don't remember after 15 years is often hiding a specific truth, not an innocent person. The next tactic was a direct attack on motive, even without full evidence. Joshua, I want you to understand this, the investigator said slowly. Stalkers usually don't choose victims randomly. They observe beforehand. They know routes. They know timings. Some subjects seek a sense of control or want to test their own limits. Keller looked up, eyes more strained than before, slightly red at the corners. I wasn't stalking anyone, he said, but his voice was weak, no longer steady. The investigator did not stop. We found your maps, found your notes, found the phone, and now we have the location logs. Everything points one way. A very long silence fell over the table. Keller did not move. The investigator said nothing more. The two sat facing each other, only the faint hum of the air conditioning audible. The moment stretched so long that in the observation room, an agent whispered, he's about to break. When the investigator finally broke the silence, he spoke in an almost understanding tone. Joshua, I don't think you wanted it to happen. Sometimes things get out of control, but only you know what really happened. Keller clenched his hands together. Knuckles turned white. A bead of sweat rolled down from his temple. He was unraveling. The investigator gently set the pen down. Joshua, say something. A few seconds passed. Then Keller spoke, not a confession, but what the investigators had waited 48 hours for. I want to meet alone, not with the whole team, just one person. In the observation room, two agents exchanged glances. This almost always signaled a turning point. The suspect wants to control the narrative in their own way, or has reached the edge between denial and disclosure. The investigator asked, who do you want to meet? Keller looked straight at him. The one who interrogated me first, he said. Just him. That did not clear him, but it meant a great deal. Innocent people don't choose interrogators. Only suspects who know they're cornered cling to the one person they believe they can negotiate with. The investigator noted the request, stood up, gathered the documents. Keller bowed his head, hands still clasped. When the interrogation room door closed, an agent said softly, he's getting ready to say something. But no one yet knew what would happen in the private meeting Keller had just requested. Only that, for the first time in 15 years, he was voluntarily opening the door to face the truth he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. The private meeting took place in a smaller interrogation room, where the first-round investigator, the only one Keller would sit across from, entered without carrying a file or any obvious recording device. Keller sat with his head down, hands clasped, eyes bloodshot, as if he had just endured a prolonged internal battle across 3 rounds of interrogation. When the investigator sat down, he said nothing, only placed a glass of water in front of Keller. It took nearly a minute for Keller to look up, his voice hoarse, as if he had been talking all night. If I talk, you won't interrupt, right? The investigator replied softly. No. Joshua, say it however you want. Keller sighed, took a deep breath, and released the first sentence that broke 15 years of silence. I know where she's lying. The air in the room froze. The investigator did not react, only nodded slightly. Keller looked down at his hands, thumb repeatedly circling the edge of a nail, a sign of stress, but also of preparing to reveal something heavy. Lily, she's no longer in Lubbock, Keller said. I took her away that very night. The investigator kept his voice steady. Joshua, tell it from the beginning. Keller swallowed hard, shoulders trembling slightly. Then he began to speak, not in the voice of a cold perpetrator, but in the voice of someone who had been running from himself for half his life. I followed her from the Depot District, not from the bar itself. I just saw her when she got out of the taxi. She was walking alone, and he paused for a few seconds, searching for words. I thought she would take a different route, but she turned into the dark stretch with no cameras. The investigator did not interrupt. Keller continued. When she passed the east dirt path, I touched the backpack strap. She turned around, then she slipped. I didn't mean to. He clutched his head with his hands, leaning forward slightly, voice choking. It happened too fast. She fell, her head hit the ground. The investigator waited for Keller to continue on his own, without adding pressure. I panicked, Keller said. I checked. She wasn't responding. I thought she was dead. A long silence followed. Keller looked up, eyes wet but vacant. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid of getting caught. I was afraid my life would end. The investigator asked very gently, "What did you do next?" Keller took a few seconds to answer. I dragged her into a darker spot. The backpack strap tore. I picked it up, then left it nearby. Keller clenched his hands. Then I put her in the car. No one saw. No one noticed. I left Lubbock immediately. The investigator asked, "Where did you take her?" Keller closed his eyes, as if the image had haunted him for 15 years. A ranch on the outskirts of Slatton. The ranch owner, back then he didn't let anyone in. I knew because I had been there for a class survey. This explained why the 2006 search team could not access that ranch. They were denied entry and had no search warrant. Keller continued. The ranch has an abandoned well about 20 feet deep. No one had used it in years. I got there around 3 in the morning. It was dark. No lights. Just the wind. The investigator memorized every detail, but did not interrupt. Keller spoke more slowly, as if the memory was eroding every line on his face. I got out of the car, opened the trunk. I lifted her, but I couldn't look at her face. I carried her along the thick grass path, so as not to leave clear tracks on the dirt. He paused, swallowing. When I reached the well, I just wanted everything to disappear. The investigator asked, "What did you do?" Keller closed his eyes, a tear falling onto the table. I dropped her down. The entire room sank into weary silence. I didn't look down into the well, Keller said. I didn't hear anything. I just ran back to the car and left. I never went back. The investigator kept his tone even. Are you sure the place still exists? Keller nodded. Yes. The well was covered with an old wooden plank. I put it back when I left. The investigator asked further. Why did you choose that place? Keller said, because I knew no one was allowed on the ranch, and the well wasn't on the survey maps, only I knew about it. The investigator looked directly at Keller, voice slow but firm. Joshua, what you're saying today will lead us to Lily's body. You understand that, right? Keller nodded, for the first time without avoiding eye contact. I know, I can't keep it in my head anymore. It's been 15 years. Then he said the final line, the one the investigator had heard in the heaviest cases. I'm tired, I'm not running anymore. When Keller signed the statement confirming his confession, his hand shook so much that the investigator had to hold the paper steady for him. The well's location was described by Keller in detail, 0.7 miles off the South Dirt Road from Slayton, behind a rotted wooden fence, near an old cement silo, with a large oak tree whose canopy leans left. The well covered by a gray wooden plank, secured with 2 stones. The investigator recorded every landmark, things that could not be fabricated randomly. When the interrogation room door opened, Keller no longer held his head high with arrogance, as in round 1, nor glared defiantly as in round 2. He was simply an exhausted man, finally pulled back to the surface by the truth he himself had tried to bury for 15 years. And now, for the first time, the investigation team knew where to go to bring Lily home. The next morning, as soon as the emergency search warrant for the ranch on the outskirts of Slatton was signed, the investigation team immediately deployed to the exact location Keller described. The ranch lay deep in a strip of barren land, weeds grown knee-high, rotted wooden fence, just as in the confession. The sky was gray, strong winds whipping old metal sheets with rattling sounds, making the atmosphere even heavier. When the forensics team reached the abandoned well area, they found the gray wooden plank covering the well mouth nearly intact, only more weathered and rotted at the edges. The 2 stones Keller mentioned were still in place, covered in a thick layer of 15 years' dust. The investigators stood at the well's edge, peering into the pitch-black shaft with no visible bottom. Its very stillness sent chills, as if time had been trapped beneath the earth. The technical team brought a mini vertical sonar system designed for deep wells and narrow pipes. A technician attached the sonar head to a cable, lowering it meter by meter. 3D images of the well's interior appeared on a screen placed close to the ground. Rock walls, mud, stagnant water, and at a depth of about 16–18 feet, the sonar detected an irregular curved outline. The technician zoomed in on the structure, a shape resembling human bones. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew they were about to touch the truth buried for 15 years. Next, they lowered a specialized camera with LED lights. The image shook slightly with the cable movement. The water below was murky, but the light illuminated objects lying motionless at the bottom. Long bones, ribs, and remnants of dark fabric, almost completely decayed. A small metal bracelet glinted in the light. A pang in the investigator's heart, because they knew from family statements that Lily had worn a small silver bracelet. The forensics team leader nodded. We proceed with recovery. A manual winch system was set up. 2 technicians in protective gear secured safety ropes and descended using an iron ladder along the well's circumference, as the mouth was too narrow for mechanical equipment. The smell of old earth, mixed with rising damp, rose up, like an odor locked in the shaft for over a decade. When they reached the bottom, the camera recorded every moment, the skeleton lying on its side, fabric tangled with mud, strands of black hair still caught in rock crevices, the silver bracelet still intact on the left wrist. The technicians used soft brushes to clear mud and identify each bone's position, then carefully placed them into specialized trays, labeling each according to the well diagram. As they lifted the skeleton, clumps of long-adhered mud fell away, the very thing that had hidden Lily's disappearance from the world for so long. Each tray was sealed and clamped, transferred gradually up the well mouth via the winch system. On the surface, the forensics team received them, placing them into anti-decomposition bags coded LRRC01 through LRRC14. One of the trays contained the silver bracelet, tarnished but clear enough to recognize the intricate engraved pattern, matching perfectly the photo provided by the family in 2006. When the fabric remnants were brought up, though nearly rotted and torn, the color and material were consistent with the fabric sample found on the dirt path that year. The crime scene analyst said quietly, "We have physical evidence linkage." The remaining small items at the well bottom held by mud were a backpack lining fragment, 2 plastic buttons, and a thin strap nearly severed, all carefully collected. When all the bones were brought up, the medical examiner stood counting the structure: leg bones, arm bones, ribs, most of the spine largely intact, despite time-induced decay. The skull was brought up last, covered in thick mud, but still showing clear contours. The investigator saw a long fracture in the occipital region, consistent with Keller's statement that Lily fell and hit her head on the ground. No further explanation was needed. The physical evidence spoke for itself. After nearly 3 hours of excavation, the area around the well was photographed in full and sealed off. An FBI agent standing by the old well, where the truth had been buried for 15 years, said softly, "If we had gotten in here in 2006, everything would have been different. But they could not. At that time, the ranch denied access, there was no search warrant, and no legal evidence to breach the rotted wooden fence. The truth had been locked away by a small legal gap, enough for Lily to remain in darkness all those years. As the forensic vehicle carried the skeleton and evidence away from the ranch, the slightened sky unexpectedly brightened, the wind eased. The investigators stood at the well's edge, looking down into the newly excavated emptiness. Though the well was empty, the heaviness remained. They knew the bell of justice had finally rung after an cruelly long time. And now they had brought Lily back into the light, with her own name, no longer an unidentified victim. Everything was clearer than ever. Keller's confession was no longer a vague story in the interrogation room. Lily's body was the final and undeniable truth. Only the next step remained to connect everything they had found to the legal responsibility of the man who had hidden her for 15 years. At the DPS Austin Forensics Lab, the remains recovered from the abandoned well were laid out on a stainless steel table, sorted into groups of bones and coded according to their excavation positions. The air in the room was heavy, not from the smell of chemicals or the chill of the preservation unit, but from the solemnity of the moment as the forensic team began to rewrite a truth that time had swallowed for 15 years. Based on the condition of the bones, the degree of decomposition and the accompanying evidence, they confirmed that the remains were those of Lily Ramirez, matching the nuclear DNA profiles stored from her in 2006. But the most critical part of the process was not just confirming identity, it was determining the cause of death, a step that would be decisive for criminal prosecution. As they reconstructed the skull, the fracture in the occipital region, exactly as observed at the well, was measured with a digital caliper at approximately 4.2 centimeters. This was an injury consistent with a powerful fall onto hard ground, as Keller had described. However, the skull showed no signs of radiating fractures or deep intracranial damage, indicating that the fall could have caused unconsciousness, but was not sufficient to cause immediate death. The forensic team moved on to examining the cervical bones, particularly the hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage. In cases of death by strangulation, the hyoid is often the site of the clearest signs, even though long periods of time can lead to structural decomposition. When lifting the hyoid under magnification, they discovered that the greater horn on the right side was broken, with sharp edges and cracking in a pattern characteristic of strong external force applied from the front. The thyroid cartilage below also showed a concave fracture line, consistent with pressure from hands or a soft but forceful object. This was classic evidence of death by manual strangulation, unmistakable from an accidental fall. Everyone in the room fell silent as the lead forensic examiner wrote in the report, "Cause of death: homicidal violence, manual strangulation." This meant Lily did not die from the fall, but from external force applied to her neck, leading to airway obstruction and brain oxygen deprivation. The fall was merely a precursor. The primary cause of death lay in the action that Keller had not fully admitted in his confession. The examiners continued with the ribs. 2 ribs on the left side showed abnormal curvature, not from decomposition, but possibly from strong compression, while the victim was being restrained. The chest cavity had no complete fractures, indicating the force was relatively brief but intense. On the right humerus, there was a downward sliding mark, often seen when a victim falls or is pulled forcefully in the same direction. The clothing fabric recovered from the well, though heavily decayed, still retained twisted cotton fibers and a tear in the left shoulder area. When compared to the fabric fragment found on the Eastern Dirt Road in 2006, the fibers showed identical weave structure and color, though faded over time, confirming they once belonged to the same garment. This helped reinforce Lily's path, being dragged from the camera-recorded location into the dirt road before being loaded into the vehicle. The silver bracelet, the item of greatest emotional value to the victim's family, not only aided in confirming identity, but also proved the body's position when lowered into the well. Based on sediment adhering to the inner surface of the bracelet, forensics determined that Lily's left arm was face down when it reached the bottom of the well. This matched Keller's statement that he did not look down, simply dropping her while she was motionless. As the analysts systematized the data, they realized the entire set of injuries aligned almost perfectly with the sequence Keller described, the fall rendering Lily unconscious, followed by Keller's panic, leading to strangulation to check for response, a behavior common in inexperienced offenders who fear the victim is still alive and might call for help. This explained why strangulation marks appeared without signs of prolonged struggle. A soil sample adhering to the skull was also sent for analysis and matched the mineral composition of the sample from the Eastern Dirt Road, the same location where Lily's left shoe was found in the initial search. This connected the secondary scene to the site of initial contact between Keller and Lily. With all the results compiled, the 47-page forensic report concluded the death of Lily Ramirez was a direct result of manual strangulation causing airway obstruction. Secondary injuries are consistent with dragging, lifting, and transporting the body. There is no evidence indicating death solely from a fall. The lead examiner signed the file and sent the original to Lubbock PD. In the final conclusion, the team added one short but weighty line: the body was silent for 15 years. But the evidence does not lie. Though time had eroded flesh and bone, the darkness at the bottom of the well had concealed the truth, and the prolonged silence had seemed eternal. The forensic file had now restored Lily's voice, the voice that investigators, her family, and the entire city of Lubbock had waited for over a decade and a half. When the forensic file was transferred to the Lubbock County District Attorney's Office, lead prosecutor Melissa Hart spent 3 consecutive days reading, comparing, piecing together, and reconstructing the entire sequence of the case based on the new evidence. On her desk were nearly 20 case files, from the 2006 sealed evidence, the 2021 forensic reports, Keller's confession, behavioral maps, and cell logs. On the final night, she stood before a whiteboard, drawing the logical chain in red marker, numbering each step from 1 to 14, a sequence so airtight that no gap could easily fit. When the initial grand jury indictment hearing took place, the small courtroom in the county court suddenly filled with investigators, legal staff, and FBI representatives. Keller was brought in wearing orange prison garb, his face far more gaunt than weeks earlier. His eyes darted quickly when he saw the prosecutor place a thick dossier on the podium, the indictment file that investigators themselves called an unbreakable chain of evidence. Prosecutor Hart began in a calm voice, not raised, not dramatic, but clear and chilling. Your Honor, we will present a chain of events and evidence directly linking every action of the defendant Joshua Keller to the disappearance and death of Lily Ramirez on the night of November 13, 2006. She presented the first evidence, cell device location logs. On the projection screen were 2 graphs, one for Lily's phone, one for device X. Both devices powered off at the same time, less than 200 meters apart. Simultaneously, device X appeared along the exact route of the white Hyundai Elantra captured on video. The defendant previously owned a 2003 Elantra, and the IMA of device X matches the old phone seized from the defendant's apartment. A large map appeared, connecting 4th Street, the Eastern Dirt Road, and the Slatton area, a perfect triangle that investigators had taken years to decode. The prosecutor moved to the second evidence, analog camera footage, and the 2011 digitization. The white vehicle appeared 3 times around the area where Lily was dropped off. The vehicle's movement radius perfectly matches device X data. The silhouette of the driver has thick eyebrows similar to the defendant. This is not direct identification, but part of an interlocking chain of evidence. She turned to the original evidence, the left shoe and torn backpack strap recovered in the initial search. The strap has mitochondrial DNA, matching the defendant, 3 rare mutations, with an exclusion probability below 1 in 8 billion. No other unrelated individual in the area has that mtDNA profile. Defense counsel objected, mtDNA does not identify a unique individual. The prosecutor responded immediately. Correct. And that is why we do not rely on DNA alone. This is a chain, Your Honor, a chain with no isolated links. She flipped to the third evidence, behavioral analysis and the offline map found in the apartment. On the defendant's map are 3 markings, exactly matching 3 locations documented by search teams in 2006, where the shoe was found, where K9 units lost the scent, and the farm that previously denied access. The notation's risk zone, second approach, and vantage depressions correspond to concepts in criminology materials the defendant studied. This is not a random map. This is a map drawn by someone who was present at those locations. A few people in the courtroom shifted as the map image was projected. Keller's pencil marks chillingly clear. The prosecutor continued. Fourth, the defendant's false statements. In 2006, the defendant claimed to be at the library from 10 p.m. to midnight, but library entry logs confirm no card swipe associated with the defendant. The classmate he named as an alibi denied seeing him that day. This is alibi fabrication. She turned to the most critical chapter, the Slayton well excavation. Sonar images, well camera footage, and remains photos were shown, not for emotional impact, but to demonstrate event consistency. The defendant described the well's location with high accuracy, depth, wooden cover, 2 rocks holding it, and the leaning oak to the left. This is information only someone who had been there would know. Then she held up the forensic report, cause of death manual strangulation. Injuries consistent with the defendant's described actions during interrogation. Defense counsel rose again. The confession was given under psychological distress. There is no direct evidence the defendant committed that act. The prosecutor did not raise her voice, simply replying, "We do not rely on the confession. We rely on the facts." She continued with the final logical chain, the link the entire case hinged on, the impossibility of coincidence. It is impossible for 2 people with the same rare net DNA structure to appear at the exact time Lily disappeared. Impossible for 2 white elantras to circle the area exactly 3 times. Impossible for 2 offline maps to mark the 2006 evidence locations. Impossible for 2 devices to power off simultaneously and reappear near the defendant's home. Impossible for anyone else to know the location of a concealed well for 15 years, except the person who dropped Lily there. She stood straight, looking directly at the judge. This is not a chain of assumptions. This is a tightly linked chain of events, verified by modern technology, forensics, digital data, and the defendant's own statements. Then she concluded with a short, decisive sentence that rang in the room like a hammer on wood. There is no reasonable doubt. As the prosecutor closed the file, Keller sat motionless. His eyes looked down at his own hands. The hands forensics confirmed had strangled Lily, the hands that had guided an entire chain of mistakes for 15 years. In the courtroom, no one needed to say anything more. The chain of evidence had spoken for itself. The trial of Joshua Keller opened with tension thick in the air. The large Lubbock County courtroom packed from front to back. The jury of 12, 8 men, 4 women, was selected after a 3-day voir dire process, ensuring no one had connections to the 2006 case. Prosecutor Hart began with a concise but sharp summary of a 15-year-old case buried by lack of evidence. But technology and persistence had brought the truth back to the surface. She emphasized that this trial judged facts, not emotions. Her words spread through the room like a declaration that every link would be exposed to the end. The first witness to the stand was the lead forensic examiner from DPS Austin. He detailed the mitochondrial DNA analysis process, explaining why the secondary DNA signal on the backpack strap could not be cross-contamination, and how 3 rare mutations reduced the exclusion probability to virtually impossible for anyone else. Defense counsel tried to exploit the weakness of MENT DNA, that it does not identify a unique individual. But the forensic expert responded calmly, "Correct. And that is why we rely on multiple layers of evidence, not just DNA." The statement made jurors nod. The second witness was the sonar technician, who had lowered the camera into the Slayton well. He projected images of the well bottom, describing each step of remains recovery, and explaining why the body's position, angle, arm posture, mud layering, perfectly matched Keller's description of how he dropped Lily that night. One juror took constant notes, eyes fixed on the screen. Next, the medical examiner presented the death report. The room fell completely silent as he pointed to the magnified hyoid image with the broken greater horn. This is a classic sign of manual strangulation. A fall does not produce this fracture pattern. Defense counsel tried to ask if the long time in the well could distort bone structure. The doctor replied briefly, "No. This phenomenon only occurs before decomposition sets in." The decisive answers like knife cuts blocked every counter-argument. Then came the FBI behavioral expert, who described the criminological pattern, behavioral map, Keller's notes, movement routes. She presented it as reconstructing the offender's shadow, someone observing the victim from afar, using topographic maps, choosing low-light approach points, and moving the body to a location without legal access. When she said, "This behavior is consistent with an individual with basic criminology knowledge," many looked toward Keller, who sat motionless, eyes sunken, no longer showing clear resistance. The lead investigator also testified, recounting finding the left shoe, fabric fibers, size 10 men's footprints, and the 15-year journey leading to that fateful excavation. He emphasized that Keller's confession did not emerge in a vacuum, but after evidence had formed a logical net tightening around him. Defense counsel tried to shift focus, saying Keller confessed under psychological fatigue. But the prosecutor needed only one sentence to counter. A confession may waver, but a grave does not. The courtroom fell silent. When all witnesses finished, Prosecutor Hart stood, approached the jury, her voice low and firm. "You do not need to believe any assumptions. Just look at the facts. DNA, matches. Phone data, matches. Camera, matches. Map, matches. Well seen, matches. Forensics, matches. Confession, consistent with injuries. A closed chain. One single truth." Defense counsel had almost no arguments of sufficient weight, only repeating, "No direct eyewitness, and everything is merely prosecution interpretation." But the jury had heard, seen, and noted every detail. After closing arguments, the judge sent the jury to deliberate. Everyone knew it could take hours, but after just 65 minutes, they returned. The foreperson stood, holding the single sheet of paper. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The air in the room froze. On the charge of first-degree murder against defendant Joshua Keller, the jury finds guilty. There were no cheers, no applause, only the weight of a final truth, named after 15 years. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks after the jury verdict, in the same courtroom where every detail of the case had been laid bare, where the air still carried the aftershock of the airtight chain of evidence that had ended 15 years of ambiguity. Joshua Keller was led in, thinner, eyes vacant, hands cold in front of him. The judge read the sentence in an unwavering voice. For the crime of first-degree murder, defendant Joshua Keller is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A soft sigh rose from the back rows, where Lily's family sat, but it was not a sigh of pain, it was one of release after a cruelly long wait. Keller showed no reaction, no anger, no collapse, just standing like a shadow detached from reality, knowing there was nowhere left to run, no story left to cling to. When asked if he wished to make a final statement, he only shook his head. The courtroom doors closed behind Keller, like a period at the end of a journey he himself had begun in darkness. But the sentence did not close only with the name of one criminal. It created ripples throughout the entire Texas investigative system. Immediately after the sentence took effect, the Texas Department of Public Safety announced that the Lily Ramirez case would become a mandatory case study in the statewide cold case training program. At the annual Texas Rangers Investigative Conference, detectives presented the 7 early-stage errors in detail: failure to seize potential suspect vehicles, failure to control private land areas, failure to enhance auxiliary cameras, failure to deeply recheck alibis, and especially failure to properly assess the importance of minor evidence, like the backpack strap. One veteran ranger said from the podium, "If a torn strap can break a case after 15 years, then no evidence is meaningless." Technology also played a central role in this change. Following the success of CQ-Lyra and mtDNA analysis in the Keller case, BPS announced expansion of next-generation DNA labs in Austin and Houston, while prioritizing resolution of cold cases from 1990 to 2010, especially those previously deemed insufficient DNA. Criminology instructors at UT Austin and Texas Tech incorporated the Lily case into curricula as a classic example of the intersection between human error and technological progress. One widely quoted lecture stated, "This case was not solved by a moment of enlightenment, but by 15 years of accumulating layers of evidence, layers that seemed disconnected, but when assembled, became an undeniable truth." But the deepest ripple was not in conference halls or labs. It was in Lily Ramirez's family, those who had lived between two worlds. One where Lily existed in memory, and one where her disappearance was an unhealed wound. When the sentence was pronounced, Lily's mother clutched the silver bracelet that forensics had returned, the only piece of metal remaining after 15 years of Lily in darkness. "The only thing I wanted," she said, voice trembling but clear, "was for her to finally come home." Lily's father stood beside her, eyes on the floor. "We have no victory, no joy, only the truth, and the truth is all we waited for." Lily's family officially held a new memorial service at Lubbock Cemetery. The first time they had a specific place to lay flowers, to call her name in light rather than in unanswered questions. Dozens of investigators attended, including retirees who had joined the initial 2006 search. One officer whispered beside the grave, "We finally brought her home." The Lubbock community, once haunted by Lily's disappearance at the time, saw the case closure as a powerful reminder that justice sometimes arrives late, but not weakened by it. For the Texas investigative community, the Keller case became a symbol of what they always told each other, but had never fully believed until now. Cold cases are not dead cases. They are simply waiting for someone persistent enough to listen to the voice of evidence that seemed forever silent. For Lily's family, the loss was not eased, but the truth was named. And sometimes, in the world of investigations full of shadows, that is the closest form of justice humans can reach. In the context of today's United States, where technology, data, and transparency are increasingly seen as the foundation of justice, the story of this case, from Lily Ramirez's disappearance in 2006 to the breakthrough in 2021, carries many valuable practical lessons. The case was only resolved when new technologies such as mtDNA analysis and the reconstruction of tower logs were deployed, reminding us that in a modern society, science not only supports justice, but is sometimes the very key to restoring truths that time has buried. The fact that the backpack strap, a small piece of evidence overlooked in the initial phase, became the pivotal point in cracking the case after 15 years underscores the importance of thoroughness in every investigative process, and also reflects the value of not dismissing any detail in everyday life. Sometimes the very small things we overlook are the decisive links that determine the outcome. Keller's actions, fabricating a false alibi, selling the vehicle at the exact right moment, keeping a burner phone, and creating gaps in the data, demonstrate the danger of someone who understands the system well, but chooses to use that knowledge to conceal wrongdoing instead of correcting it. In a society that emphasizes personal responsibility, like the United States, this story reminds us that knowing the law should never be used to evade the law. The truth will ultimately come back to find those who try to avoid it. The case also highlights the crucial role of the community and the victim's family. It was their persistence that kept the investigative spotlight from going out. The lesson for every individual living in modern American society is speak up when you have suspicions, believe in the value of data and science, and remember that justice may come late, but will not vanish if there are people persistent enough to seek it. Thank you for joining us on this journey to uncover the truth after 15 years of silence. If you appreciate stories told through data, justice, and perseverance, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. See you again in new journeys, where we continue to explore how the truth always finds its way back.